He broke in and he put a gun in my mouth, which is something that I don't know if you ever forget. He basically said, "We're partners now." This was real. I was in over my head and I had no idea how I was getting out of this.
So Molly, for people that aren't familiar with your story, you are the real life inspiration behind the movie Molly's Game.
And the people that started to walk in the room were mind-blowing. Leonardo DiCaprio and Tobey Maguire, Ben Affleck, politicians that are household names. I remember driving home with a stack of cash. I felt so alive, and I had seen this thing that I could never unsee again. I wanted it to feel like this immersive experience, like you walked into this room and you were in a James Bond movie. It taught me so much about human psychology and like core human fears and core human aversions, and I started using that in manipulative ways on the wrong people. Human beings have a really hard time overcoming some of their darker natures. I try to have a discipline of writing a little bit every day, even when I don't feel motivated or like I have any cognitive energy. And then, after I kind of get those things, hopefully out of the way, when my daughter wakes up, and this was a really hard transition for me to make. I transitioned to, this is her time. Because, it doesn't come as easily to me as I think it does to some people to parent. It's very hard for me to shift out of that productivity, like let's make the experience 1% better. It's hard to get out of my head in a strategic planning way and just into like, no, we're just gonna do things that have absolutely no like long-term value, but they do, and so I just try to be super present for her. And then she goes to school, and then I, work on the things that I'm working on, whether it's political fundraisers or, writing books or consulting or, I'm on the road a lot.
So how do you strike that balance between like your upbringing, because it worked out pretty well for you in a lot of ways.
In some ways.
But how do you strike the balance between, okay, this is what I had and this is how it turned out for me and this is what I want for my daughter? Like what's that? Yeah. What does that balance look like?
Yeah, I've done a lot of kind of deep thinking about that, because I don't, my brothers and I all have been able to come from, I think like the high school I went to, I think they read us the books in class. We didn't go to this, we weren't like private school kids. We grew up in a very small town. We kind of like, it wasn't like we were super intellectually challenged or whatever. And we've, Jeremy's 5'10", 185 and still played the NFL and was world champ. And so like there are certain parts of our upbringing that I think I very much want to hold on to. And then there are certain parts that I very much do not want to. And so kind of the balance is my dad did an amazing job of packaging winning and competition and the glory of day-to-day discipline and constructive suffering for this greater dream. He did, he did this amazing job of inspiring us in that way. And then my mom did this. I mean, she could do anything. She could figure anything out. Like, I loved this book. And it was about this little girl that lived in this little house with yellow curtains, and she built with her own two hands like a replica of that. She just taught fly fishing. She could figure out how to fix all of our cars. I remember when I came home one day and I said, I'm in history class, and every single book that we're reading, every single biography we're reading is about men. And so she went in talked to our librarian. I still remember her name, Tina Sekovic, and she made it so like I could be her, like assistant, and then Tina would assign me. I got to read books about women, and also my mom just kind of from a young age instilled in us this sense of integrity matters and how you treat people in the world matters. I think where we went, I think the things that I don't want to emulate, and again, my parents were young and they were trying to do their best and they did a pretty damn good job. But there was this kind of, I think, underlying messaging that if you aren't winning, if you aren't getting A's, if you aren't, looking at this family bike ride as the Tour de France, if you have any complaint, I love the fact that we were raised to not be victims, that it was, if we got in trouble, if we got a bad grade in school, it was not our teacher's fault. There are things we could do. If, if we were too cold in 60 below degree weather, it wasn't that it was too cold, it was that we didn't have the right clothes. And then my dad has since he's gotten older, been like, actually, there is cold weather. Yeah, he's just, and so, there's, yes, like owning your life, the good, the bad, the ugly, is incredible. But there also are these moments where you're allowed to have some emotion that is authentic, right? And nobody needs to double down on it. Nobody needs to identify with it. But there is this, I think, what I try to do with my daughter is that she's allowed to be her authentic self. She wants to wear an Amelia Earhart hat and a tutu and snow pants to school. Great. I don't need her to look put together and, hair perfectly done, because that's about me, right? She's allowed to explore what she wants to explore, but there are boundaries, right? She's got to have good manners. She's if she starts something, commits to something, she's got to finish it. But just this understanding that you don't have to do this for me, for my love. You don't have to do this to be accepted or revered. And she's an only child, so there's a difference, because that you add in sibling rivalry, which I also think is incredible in the right context. So I think it's that fine line between these, this kind of not phoning it in parenting, where you're using everything that's at your disposal to impart moral lessons and to show your kid the glory of sports and the result of a ballet dancer who has practiced and practiced and practiced, and teaching her that when people are unkind, it's probably because they've been hurt, and using life as this fertile ground of teaching them and teaching them sophisticated things, which my parents did so well, and holding her feet to the fire and insisting that she learn discipline, but not for me, for her. But that at the end of the day, if she does it all wrong, there's unconditional love there. And, it's hard to read parenting books because it doesn't seem like each child is so different. But something that has really resonated with me when I think about it is, I've listened to Kobe Bryant speak a lot. And you think about Kobe, who, and I think Michael Jordan too, to some degree, or maybe to a full degree. I haven't heard him speak about this in particular, but knowing what I know from, just being familiar with him as a person and an athlete. Kobe's starts playing basketball. He doesn't score one basket the whole season, and his dad comes to every game anyway. And at the end of the season, he said, or mid-season, he says, "You don't have to come watch me anymore. I'm not scoring any baskets." And his dad says, "I'm not coming to watch you score baskets. I'm coming because I love you. I'm your dad." And what Kobe goes on to say, and I'm paraphrasing all this, is because he had that solid ground at home, because he had that safety and that unconditional support at home, it gave him the ability to go out into the world and fail and try and strive. And then you juxtapose that with somebody, like a Tiger, who was just, from the first moment, you're going to play golf. This is what you're going to do. And even if he loved it, there was a certain amount of, having a parent so heavily invested in it that it's not necessarily even coming from you, but it's what you need to feel accepted or appreciated. And, when you look at the two different outcomes, and, I could go example after example in people that I've just seen over the years from sports or from, different kinds of endeavors. And it really does seem like if you raise a kid with a real solid sense of who they are and you let them explore, and then you give them the tools and you inspire them and you hold their feet to the fire in terms of learning discipline and stuff, but it's their passion that's driving it, and they don't feel like they have to do it in order to get accepted or validated. It seems like A, a lot more powerful, and B, the right thing to do for your kid. Like, I don't need my child to live my unlived life, And so that's the great thing about, being raised by people and then, kind of having the ability to have open discussions about that and to see how your friends raise their kids. And because I waited till I had Fiona when I was 43. So I'd seen a lot and I thought about a lot, and I'm certainly not doing everything perfectly at all. But I really think hard about it, and I really try to separate this. Is this about me, or is this about preparing this little human for the world?
Yeah. First of all, I didn't know that about Kobe. Like, you would think that he's just such a savage. Like, you would think that I wouldn't have guessed that about him, that's the kind of father that he had. I would have guessed that he had the opposite, because Absolutely. You hear stories like that and you think, okay, you were being dragged by something, like whether you liked it or not.
Yeah.
So that's super interesting.
It is.
And I'll keep that in too. It's funny. I always try to do these little warm-ups, so then people start saying interesting stuff. I'm like, all right, we're rolling. So, and we started talking about obviously some of your childhood stuff, but yeah, I would say we're rolling now. So, okay. Thank you for coming. It's awesome to have you. I'm glad we can make this work, and appreciate you coming out, even though you've had a couple little hiccups throughout the day, but we're here now. And
what's a day without hiccups?
I guess so. But yeah, for people that aren't familiar with their story, I typically just give people a little intro. But you've had a crazy life. And it was essentially adapted into the movie Molly's Game, which came out in 2017 with Jessica Chastain, directed by Aaron Sorkin, right?
And written, yeah.
Yeah, written. Yeah, because that was his directorial debut. That's right. He's typically a screenwriter, correct?
That's right.
Awesome movie. I saw it when it first came out, and then I read the book in preparation for this. And like I told you offline, the book was I thought it was way better than the movie. Not that the movie wasn't great, but it read like the movie script, but with, like I said, way more detail than you can allow for 2 hours in a movie theater. So it was great. And yeah, like I said, thank you for coming out here and sitting down. It's an honor to have you. So
I appreciate that. Yeah, no, of course.
So yeah, let's start it at the beginning. We kind of started talking about your childhood, but so where'd you grow up? And then we'll kind of weave that in.
I grew up in Loveland, Colorado. Pretty small town, kind of in the flats of Colorado. And it was, we lived outside of the city, if you can call it that. And we lived on a lake and, had four-wheelers and motorcycles and just, during the summer we were water skiing or getting our four-wheeler stuck in the mud or, we were just outside kids. And then during the winter, we went up skiing every weekend. So we were certainly outside all the time and kind of in this, we were like little wildlings, I think we had like 26 pets because we would always be like collecting like animals and stuff. And, it was a very nature-based childhood, I would say, with a lot of like freedom. I mean, I think, we'd be like miles and miles away and my mom could whistle like this so loud, she still can, and we would hear it and we would know that was when it was time to come home. And yeah.
That's awesome. So, I mean, brothers, sisters, you had two brothers, right?
Yep. Two younger brothers. Jordan is my middle brother and Jeremy is the youngest. And we're all about 2 years apart.
Underachievers too, both of those guys.
Oh my gosh. Just goody two-shoe overachievers who kind of knew, like their skill sets were so obvious from the very beginning. I mean, Jeremy was, just truly like an athletic prodigy at a very young age. And he played football and we lived in small town, Friday Night Lights. And then he also was a mogul skier and he was number one in the world at 16. And then he went on to win 3 world championships, compete in 2 Olympics. He played football at the University of Colorado. He ultimately had to leave the program because they wouldn't allow him to accept endorsement deals in skiing. And he actually testified in front of Congress and brought it to, I think he sued the NCAA and, he was super young, but ultimately had to step away, even though super talented. Like first time he ever touched the ball, ran it back 80 yards for touchdown, ran a 4.3 40, like crazy. But then he went on to, to have this Olympic career. And then after the Turin Olympics, went to the NFL Combine and got drafted 5th round of the Philadelphia Eagles. And then, I always say and he and he was an Abercrombie model. I'm like, I don't even get to be the pretty one. Like, are you kidding me? Like, here's this Abercrombie campaign with my brother, And then he decided that because he traveled a lot and he spent a lot of time in Asia and he saw the reverence that they have there for, the elders and felt like that wasn't the case here. So he started this charity granting wishes for senior citizens, which was eventually picked up by a really large organization. And then, Jeremy would be in the car on the way to the mountains. And my dad would say, "What are you thinking about, son?" And he would just say, "Nothing." And we were like, okay, so it's just a good thing he can run really fast. And then he ends up founding a software company, scaling it up and selling it to private equity at the highest valuation of tech. And now he's CEO of the X Games.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was little brother. And middle brother, Harvard educated cardiothoracic surgeon at Massachusetts General. After a hard day of saving the lives of kids with congenital heart defects, goes home and cooks dinner for his wife and kids. So yeah, I mean, Jordan was like a genius and Jeremy was this athletic prodigy. And in another family, maybe my intellect or my athletic ability would have been more impressive. But I had some pretty tough competition. And, in my family, academics and athletics were everything.
What's up, guys? If you watch this show, or especially if you know me in person, you'll know that I have a uniform. And it's usually either a black or a gray t-shirt. And I've been wearing True Classic t-shirts for probably over 10 years now, which is why I was so excited when they reached out to become a sponsor of the show. So the reason that I wear them is, as you can see, they are tight in the arms, and they make me look more jacked than I am, which is not that jacked at all. And they are looser around the midsection, which in my opinion is how a t-shirt should fit. And they're super soft. They're really comfortable. You can dress them up or dress them down, which is exactly what I look for in my uniform. And so their goal is to elevate everyday basics so that people can look and feel great without paying designer prices. And clearly it's working. Over 30 million shirts sold, more than 5 million customers, and hundreds of thousands of 5-star reviews. And it's not just for dudes either. The same premium comfort and fit are now available for women and kids too. One brand that the whole family can count on. So if you too want to look like you're in better shape than you actually are and be comfortable while you're doing it, go to trueclassic.com/Dalton to revamp your wardrobe for 2026. Again, that's trueclassic.com/DALTON. You know what nobody tells you about weeknight dinner? It's a recurring problem that never ends. Every day you got to figure it out, what to cook, what to buy, how long it's going to take you to make it, going to the grocery store after you're already fried from working all day. So I use HelloFresh, but not because I want to become a chef, but because I'm busy and I want to buy my time back. I don't want to go stand in the grocery store, shop around for an hour, then go home and figure out a recipe. They send pre-portioned ingredients, step-by-step recipe cards, and meals that are actually doable in around 30 minutes. No overthinking, no grocery store run, no wasted food. You get 100 plus recipe options every week, bigger portions so that you're not still hungry after, and legit quality. Sustainably sourced seafood, antibiotic-free chicken, and seasonal produce that actually tastes like something. They've also expanded steak and seafood options at no extra cost, added more high-protein meals, Mediterranean options, which are my current favorite, and even GLP-1 friendly recipes if that matters to you. So again, the real win for me isn't just dinner, it's getting my time back. So if you hate cooking, if you hate going to the grocery store, if you just value your time like I do, then I highly recommend it. So go to HelloFresh.com/Dalton10FM to get 10 free meals plus a freeze-willing knife, a $144.99 value on your third box. Offer valid while supplies last. Free meals applied as a discount on your first box. New subscribers only. Varies by plan. Again, that's HelloFresh.com/DALTON10FM, as in Frank and Mary, to get 10 free meals plus a free knife. And so I guess, what were your parents like?
My dad, larger than life. When he's proud of you, like the sun shone, He's a psychologist and really raised us with this very useful, though at the time somewhat annoying, exploration into human behavior. And he was a stickler about discipline. He called it constructive suffering. I'd be like, I don't want to do my algebra homework. And he's like, but Molly, you're suffering constructively. And we were not allowed to let fear stop us from doing something. I mean, some kids get grounded for sneaking out of the house. We would get in trouble for letting fear bench us. And I think it's because he saw so much in therapy. And also he himself had to battle fear. And I think he saw the ramifications if you don't battle that voice inside that says, I can't do this. This is too scary. He said, you gotta feed the right one. Which really resulted in, at a very young age, learning that you can be absolutely terrified of something and then you can do it anyway. And then that became like kind of an addiction, right? Like, and if not an addiction, certainly a very empowering way to live life. And, he was intense, super intense. My mom, the kindest, totally brilliant, like genius IQ. That's definitely where Jordan got his engineering brain. She could figure anything out. She master negotiator. She was just seeing her like head of the PTA or head of the water board, and I would just be like, "Mom, you can't talk, you can't do that to people," And she's like, "No, this is how you get it done," But also just deeply kind, and like kind of would at night lay in bed with us and just say, "What did you do today that you were proud of, and what could you have done better?" And really talking about integrity and the importance of being of service in the world. And so we had this really spectacular polarity of life skills that I think together gave us an incredible edge.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know I laughed at constructive suffering just because it's funny, like how it was codified essentially.
It is.
But the actual principle of it is amazing. And I think it's throughout life, like people think, like you said, it's okay to feel scared. It's okay to feel fear, but it's not okay to let it hold you back.
Yeah.
You have to move through it. But I guess a lot of people don't realize, like myself included in a lot of situations, we're wired to think that any sort of discomfort is like a red flag.
Yeah.
And so like, it's not supposed to feel good the whole time. It's not supposed to feel like not scary ever.
No.
Right. So that's amazing that he like laid that out and instilled that for you guys at an early age.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was kind of like, if we didn't do it, we knew we were in trouble. So, which I don't know if I'd be able to replicate. I don't know. But yeah, I ultimately took it too far. But I think, I remember something my dad said to me after, because my brothers and I were all competing in skiing, and, we were standing on podiums and we loved it. And, I think it exceeded even what my dad or mom thought our weekly skiing trips were going to involve. We started competing locally, and, we were winning. And then, my life changed dramatically at 12 years old, and I got diagnosed with really severe scoliosis. And the process of fixing it was to try to straighten my spinal cord and fuse the top 11 vertebrae together, and then put 2 metal rods down the side. So what essentially that meant was immovable thoracic spine and a much shorter vertebrae, that's taking shock absorption, and also, not being able to really like have any flexibility or movement in your thoracic spine was certainly going to change your anatomy. And I just remember the surgeon saying all this, and, and I was just like, okay, but when can I get back to training? And I remember him saying, oh, you're going to have a great life, and there, there are things that you're going to be able to do and live mostly a normal life, but it's time for you to find a new hobby, basically like this is over. And I just remember being so angry because it wasn't, I just remember thinking like, he doesn't know who I am. Like, he doesn't know what this is to me. And he knows spines, he knows scoliosis, but like, how dare he just reduce this thing that feels like a calling to, some flippant answer. And it was the first time, I guess, in my life that I decided I wasn't going to be a rule follower, and that, I was angry, and I used that anger to fuel me. Like, it's like someone tells you can't. That's the best thing ever for me. And so I remember getting back on the mountain after a year, and the surgery was intense. And then I had like all these, I had some complications after, and my liver and gallbladder were failing, and I was like in and out of the hospital. And so it was, it was kind of a gnarly road, but when the fusions healed and everything, I got back on the mountain, and it was awkward to kind of like figure out this my sport again. But what started to become like way harder than the physical part was the mental part. And up until this point, I had this like very almost delusional sense of confidence. Like, I can do whatever I want, and it was replaced by kind of like an insecurity and doubt, and this sort of like relentless voice, like, you're gonna fail. And it got so loud that I didn't know what to do about it. And so I talked to my dad about it. And I remember him saying this line to me that would open up a portal or an idea that became so profoundly important that it's foundational in every success that I've ever had. And he said, Molly, your problem is not that you have that voice in your head. Your problem is that you're listening to it. And it was like, when I was a pretty deep thinker. I read a lot, and I thought about it, and I was like, okay, so that means that there's this voice in my head that I can hear that doesn't necessarily need to run the show. Like, there's a part of my psyche, my brain, that can hear this voice and then can make a choice. And, I definitely was helped, like, he helped me to realize this. And then, I started working with sports psychologists and reading books, and that led me to meditation and mindfulness, which I wish we had better like terms for this, because it's somewhat of an ineffable thing, but essentially what it is you have this default mode network running that when you're not hyper focused on something, it's just kind of it's this dialogue that's running through your head, and it's composed of a lot of different inputs. It's comprised of a lot of different survival instincts. And it's not necessarily telling the truth. And so through meditation, when you sit down to meditate, you put your focus on the breath. And for me, the breath is, and how it was explained to me is the breath is just somewhere to anchor your focus so that you can train it. And then the inner dialogue starts to go, and you just bring it back to the breath. And then you bring it, you'll notice you get caught up in the kind of like, chattiness, and then you just bring it back to the breath. And then that repetition over and over and over has allowed me to, I wouldn't say silence the noise, but turn the volume way down and see the transient nature of it. So, and to have so much more agency over decision-making and emotional regulation and strategy and negotiation. Because when you can quiet the noise within and without, and you can have a much straighter line to the truth, as much as humans can interpret the truth, right? It's just a monster tool. I mean, it's such a profound performance tool. The mind is an incredible ally or an incredible enemy.
Yeah, I would say that I'll just speak from personal experiences. It's not always, it very frequently doesn't have your best interest in mind with the thoughts that enter your head. And I think like with my own personal meditation experience, it's not a matter of trying to completely silence that. It's just a matter of like becoming aware of the thoughts that actually enter your head and saying like, okay, does that one resonate with me? Is it actually in my best interest? And separating the voice from like you.
Totally.
So, but like for you, like what do you, and you mentioned it's some, I guess things that have been hardwired into you, but like, what do you think that voice is? Like if you had to personify it?
Well, scientists call it the default mode network. And the reason that it feels that it's so compelling when you're in flow state, when you're doing something that you're hyper-focused on, or even when you're watching a show that has all of your attention. The reason that that's so compelling is because the default mode network you're not hearing it. And so when you go out of that focus state, then you kind of are listening to the script that's running through your brain. And it's there's a lot of discussion about it. There's so much people don't understand about the brain, but it seems to be kind of like this running script of, you got in a fight with somebody a couple of days ago, like what's the resolution there? Are we, there's some rumination there. What is the best thing, like some survival instinct stuff coming through, some resentment stuff coming through. It just seems to be like this. If you had a computer with like some wild code, that just like ran, like every time it got an input, it's just like running it through. So I think it's like just your brain trying to process all the inputs from what you're exposed to. And then probably some, deeper, more like, ancient survival things. And some of it can be quite useful. And some of it, like you said, is totally not going to get you where you need to go. And the more I've meditated, the more I have more space between that voice and how I respond. Or somebody, kind of triggering me and how I respond. And, I can't say enough about meditation. It addressed a lifelong insomnia. Because when you can quiet your mind, you can go to sleep.
Yeah.
I on a scale of 1 to 10, have a 12 out of 10 fear of turbulence on an airplane. Even though I knew all the logical stuff, it just triggered something in me. I don't know if it was like lack of control, like what, it was this thing that was just, first of all, I hated it. It's like, I'm scared of this, and I'm not scared of these other things. But I was able to overcome that. Like, I'll be the calmest person on the plane now when there's turbulence. It just doesn't affect me. But, I will say that meditation and mindfulness and this mental training, I don't think it's a one and done. I think, you kind of like have this practice, you get things are good, things are solid, and then you get thrown another curveball or another challenge. And then, maybe you've got to bring in a different tool. Or I think it's a constant, sort of like, okay, here's the problem. What's the solution? Like I get very wary of people when they said, and then I learned how to meditate and, fix everything. Or I did the 12 steps and now I'm good. You know what I mean? Or I took this course on money and now I'm like, I can't not make money. Like, I don't think that's how life works. And I'm not just basing that, I'm not doing an N of one. I'm not just basing that on my experience. I'm basing it on the experience of everyone I've ever known And, I speak 40, 50 times a year. And anytime I can, which is most of the time, I get off stage and I talk to people and I listen to their stories. And it's just like, it's so clear, it's so evident that life is this series of tests, challenges, adversity that is meant to incorporate growth, I guess. And so I do think you have to constantly be in solution mode, because I'll tell you, after my daughter was born, I thought I was like Zen mama. I thought I was gonna be like this earth Zen mama. Like, I've been my brain, my amygdala grew to like 10 times the size. I was terrified of everything, things that were completely illogical to be terrified about. And there was no amount of meditation or mindfulness that could touch it. It was so, such a strong biological impulse to protect this child. And it was like, probably there was probably some diagnosis to it, because it was so crazy for a while. But then, you got to like say, okay, well, this tool isn't cutting it. So let me kind of like go back to the drawing board. Let me like read, try to tap into wisdom, try to, look at research, current research. Like, I think just being able to say, this is tough. Okay, but let's find the solution. I will never not try to find the solution, Yeah,
100%. So I guess lastly, before we get into your like story, your adulthood with your dad, do you think that his experience as a psychotherapist, like, do you think that he intentionally fostered that environment in a lot of ways because he knew like what the right threads to pull on were, like fostering that creative environment, giving you that like implicit idea that love is achievement and that sort of thing? Do you think that was intentional?
I don't think that was I think there was so much about what he did, and certainly was an intentional parent in many, many ways. And I think a lot of that is because he's seen humanity. He's seen the human condition over and over and over and over again. And there are these consistent patterns. And so I think he was working backwards from, okay, what are these things that I see constantly plaguing people and keeping them back? And so I think the intentional lessons came from that. And I think the performance stuff and the I think that was more emotional. And I think probably it had to do with, listen, we're all human beings, right? Like, if you have a kid, if you love sports and you have a kid who is, a star athlete, that's going to move you. You're a human being, right? Or like, you have a kid who is all of a sudden like beating adults at chess at 5, and like you're in academia. Like, that's going to move you. And so I don't think he was intentionally imparting that message. I think that was just, being a human being and being a father and being someone who, had big dreams and wanted to, like, was obsessed with sports and wanted to be, like, probably be a heart surgeon, and I also think, my dad, very type A, very alpha, and he sort of ran the family as like, he's the boss, right? And I think the rules sometimes were inconsistent, and the line moved. And that's when I started to say, this isn't okay. You want to tell me the rules? The rules are consistent, right? Okay. You want to keep moving the goalposts like when you're in a bad mood or you want to just have unlimited, unchecked power. That's not okay with me. And that caused a lot of drama and turmoil in my family because there's something inside of me that when I feel like something is unfair or unjust, there is no consequence that will stop me, like none.
So what's an example of that? Because it feels like something stands out.
He would say like, draw a line somewhere. And I'd be like, no, that's not what you said. That's not fair. That's what gives you the right, And then I would get punished for, kind of like not complying, which would then make me even more mad. And then I just felt like it was my job to push back like all the time. And my brothers and my mom would just be like, just like keep your mouth shut, And I mean, I swear I spent my high school life grounded. And there was, I created there was a lot of drama. And I think I was also probably angry and sad that I felt like he liked and loved my brothers better. And I thought it was because either they were boys and, or because they were really excelling at things that he really respected. And, I was giving it my all. I mean, after my back surgery, the same year that Jeremy made the U.S. development team, I made the U.S. development team. And my dad, was like, I don't think you're ready. And then Jeremy and I both podiumed 3rd overall in North America that year. And, I made it all the way to, I qualified for the senior national Olympic qualifier. And so, and I don't think like anybody could truly understand what getting up and training and having real like chronic pain all the time meant, or like how hard I had to work to be that competitive, because Jeremy was number 1 in the world, And so, and then I have a very different way of learning. And so I would have to figure that out. And I remember like, okay, like I have to get good, I have to do well, I have to get good grades. But, I have this like very different way of learning and also a shorter attention span and like a much like sort of bigger picture, esoteric way of thinking and a mind that really wants like novelty and like has a really hard time with like sterility. And so I just figured out, that if I like totaled up the number of pages that I needed to read in a semester, divided it by the, days in the semester, then I could read these small little chunks. And then I would make a quiz for myself at the end of the week. And then, that's how I did well in high school. But Jordan was still in like my math class, even though he's 2 years younger and like just like beating me in tests and stuff. And so, it was like childhood angst. And then, but also just a very like fierce sense of, I want justice and fairness. And I don't think it's fair to have, one person in charge of the decisions, the lives, like of everybody in the family, and that's some people's parenting styles. And my brothers they towed the line. They were fine with it, but I decided to be a freedom fighter.
Contrarian.
Yeah, contrarian.
So yeah, let's just talk about that now, because I think that was my favorite scene in the movie. The one at it's in New York, when in real life it was in LA.
Yeah.
But it's after you get wrapped up and before you get sentenced, you have this conversation with your dad that you just alluded to, and you ask him like point blank, why didn't you like me as much as your brothers?
Yeah.
But how, like the dialogue in that scene, how true to life was that?
Obviously it wasn't as dramatic. I wasn't like having a mental breakdown on the skating rink in Central Park and selling, Chanel gloves for ice skates. But I mean, that was great writing. But what happened was my dad would write me personal handwritten letters, like on a yearly basis, saying what you're doing isn't going to end well. And that's along with like the conversations he would have with me. And I kind of pushed him away because at that point I was making millions of dollars. I had built this business. I was, like running things in New York and LA in a completely male dominated world, and from a very young age. And, there wasn't, I wanted him to be impressed, and he wasn't. He wanted me to do something that was more legitimate and sustainable and less dangerous, et cetera. And so, we had this very fraught relationship throughout my life. And when I got arrested by the FBI, I called my dad and he said, get a public defender. And, I hung up on him and I was like, fuck you. Like, I need my dad right now. I don't need, a moral lesson. And so we didn't speak for a year. And he called me probably like 6 weeks before sentencing, and everybody thought I was going to prison. And he said, listen, you're my firstborn kid and my only daughter, and we're going to hash this out. And so he came to LA, where I was living with my best friend, because I had to get a job during this time. And so she was like employing me, and, and we had this 2-day come to Jesus. And I think I was always afraid to ask that question because I thought one of two things would happen. I thought he would lie and I would see it, or I thought he would tell me the truth, because my dad is someone who will tell you the truth, and that it would be worse to have confirmation of it than to have sort of a hypothetical idea of it. And so I asked him, and the second I asked him, I could tell that it wasn't the truth, because he became very emotional and got tears in his eyes. And he said, I don't love your brothers more than I love you. Sometimes I like them better, which is valid. They were a lot easier. They put my parents through like nothing but joy. But he said, this is where it differs from the movie. He said, I've been a therapist for 40 years. I think the world is hard, and I think it's harder for girls and women, and I want it to make you tough. And he's just, sitting there with like tears coming out of his eyes. And he said, and I don't think I did it perfectly. And I think I made a lot of mistakes, and, I'm sorry. And it was this moment of like all that weight I was carrying around, like all that like drive to prove something to the, to the world, but like to my dad, to the point that I was willing to risk losing my freedom and my life for it. And you're not conscious of these things at the time, but like when it melts away, when you realize that these places that you've colored in because you didn't have the story or the facts were not the truth, it's transformative. And so, I think we talk about risk a lot in business or in sports, but relationships are the riskiest things that we engage in a lot of ways. And so many people are so afraid, including myself, to ask these hard questions and to go to these places. And sometimes you live your entire life without having those moments. And so, I mean, I'm so happy that we had that conversation. My only regret is how much time, we missed, how much time I spent thinking that I hated him or that I, or feeling hurt when, the truth was something different. So, yeah, I mean, and it's not always going to be that answer either. But I do think that getting the answer, or at least going for it, is cathartic. The worst thing ever is to have this sort of like existential question, this like deep like ache or like, unanswered question that you're not addressing. I don't think that is a great setup for happiness or peace. Because at least, if you get a different answer, then you have closure, and then you can, you've got a dead body. Like you can deal with that, right? But like it's the difference between like finding the corpse or like just having something missing for the rest of your life. Not to get graphic, but like then you can close a chapter.
Listen up, fellas. If you're making any New Year's resolutions this year, there's a good chance that they start in the kitchen. Maybe it's eating healthier, cutting back on delivery, or finally getting rid of that old crusty pan that's been haunting your stove since college. Speaking of the kitchen, here's a video of Gordon Ramsay making magic in the kitchen. Brace yourselves. Ugh. Okay, what you're actually seeing here is my pre-interview routine. The same thing every morning. 3 organic eggs, low sugar oatmeal, and FRCC medium roast coffee. But in my day-to-day life, a 12-inch pan is pretty much the one thing that I couldn't live without in the kitchen because I either cook or I'd heat up 5 meals a day on it. So this is the one I use. It's from Hexclad. I use it because it has both the performance of a stainless steel pan and the convenience of a non-stick pan, and I don't have to choose between the two like I normally would. So if it passes the eggs test without sticking, then we're good to go. They're also toxin-free, dishwasher and oven safe, and they come with a lifetime warranty. It's also just really cool looking. I don't know if this video will do it justice or not. So new year, new you, new cookware. You can now ditch your crusty old pan for a sexy new Hexclad pan at a discounted rate. For a limited time only, our listeners are getting 10% off with our exclusive link. Just head to hexclad.com/Dalton. Again, that's hexclad.com/DALTON for 10% off your order. And make sure to support the show and let them know that we sent you. Getting older hits harder than we all expect. One day you wake up with stiff joints, recovery from the gym takes longer, your hair's thinning, your nails are breaking, and your skin just doesn't have that same smooth glow anymore. So aging sucks, but it doesn't have to. So that's where Bubs Naturals collagen peptides come in. Starting in your mid-20s, your body starts producing less collagen every year. And collagen is the glue of the body. It's the protein that holds everything together. With Bubs, you can help restore those collagen levels closer to what they were at when you were younger. That means stronger joints, healthier hair and nails, smoother skin, and faster recovery. And it's super easy to use. All you have to do is mix it into your coffee or your juice or your smoothie, whatever you drink in the morning. And it's tasteless, odorless, and dissolves instantly. There's no clumps or weird aftertaste. And here's what makes Bubs truly different, and a big part of the reason that we partnered with them here at the show. The brand is a tribute to former Navy SEAL Glenn Bub Doherty, an American hero who gave his life saving Americans in Benghazi, Libya. Glenn's call sign was Bub, and he was the kind of guy who always pushed for self-improvement and helped everybody around him. And that DNA is woven into the Bubs brand. And to honor him, which is awesome, Bubs donates 10% of all their profits to charity, starting with the Glenn Doherty Memorial Foundation. And lastly, Bubs is built to the highest standards. No junk, zero sugars, no sweeteners, no fillers. It's third-party tested, NSF certified for sport, Whole30 approved, and sustainably sourced from grass-fed, pasture-raised cattle. It's trusted by over 100,000 customers and was named Best Collagen of 2024 by Health.com. So for a limited time only, our listeners are getting 20% off of Bubs Naturals if you use code Dalton at checkout. Just head to bubsnaturals.com and use code DALTON and you're all set. And after you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support the show and let them know that we sent you. To your point, like there's a lot of people that would rather leave that corpse undiscovered because that's the comfort that they know. And sometimes even if your current situation is uncomfortable, it might not be more uncomfortable than the answer you'd find out if you actually ask the question. So
yeah, I think the anticipation of the truth is always worse than getting the truth. Maybe not always, but more times than not.
Yeah, we certainly tend to build situations up in our head. But okay, so for people that saw the movie, you have an accident in I think it's the very first scene of the movie.
Yeah.
Where you trip over, it's a pine bough it's called.
Yeah.
Or not trip over it, you ski over it.
Yeah.
And then that effectively ends your skiing career. Is that
right.
true to life as well?
That is true to life. Yeah.
Okay, so after that you plan on going to law school.
Right.
But you take a year off first and go to LA.
Yeah.
So you move to LA, and then how does everything kind of unfold from there?
Well, so just to give some background context, I had no intention of staying in LA. I had no interest in the entertainment business. All I really wanted to do was go somewhere where I felt because after my ski career ended abruptly, I had a very deep loss of identity. And, this what, maybe it was in the book, it wasn't in the movie, but I even tried to do a study abroad in the Greek islands. And that, the thought process there was let me get out into the world and see that it's so much bigger than this little niche, mogul skiing thing. And that was one of the most incredible times of my life. But then when I came back to Boulder and there were the mountains and there were my teammates, I was just, I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I also had felt God, I just did it all right. I put everything I had into this. And I skied over this tiny piece of pine bough that pre-released my ski, and how do I process that, And so I decided I just wanted to go somewhere and just be a kid. And I just wanted to go somewhere and be warm because I'd been chasing winter since I was 3 years old, even during when you're skiing at that level, even during the summer, you go find a glacier or you go find somewhere to train that is in the Southern Hemisphere where it's winter. So I wanted to be warm. I wanted to just go to the beach, whatever. And so, because my parents were not on board and I basically had to go somewhere where I could get on a couple tanks of gas and then get a job immediately, LA made the most sense. And so I got there and I got a bunch of jobs. I was a terrible food waitress and kind of a terrible cocktail waitress, but basically I saw really fast, I'm not gonna just bring people drinks for a couple dollars, like I'm going to bring them bottles or nothing at all. And so like I just like got really good at, like, but when it came to like food and remembering things, I was just not great. And so at one of these restaurants, I got a job like at this fine dining restaurant. I knew nothing about fine dining, but pretended like I did on the application. And my boss at the time was like, you obviously lied. You have no idea how to open a bottle of wine. You've like just ruined like thousands of dollars worth of wine. Like, like you don't know anything about fine dining. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. But he said, I have seen you show up for work early and stay after. And so why don't you come work for me? We just started this real estate development fund. So I started working for him, and it was an office unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was 3 partners, and 2 of them were like, one of them was like this trust fund kid from Montana who was just so crazy. Like I'd never seen anything like this. Like crazy fun, but also just like, like throwing money it was just this different world. And, I was like learning about how they did deals and stuff. And it was a tough job because they were tough, but, I was learning about things that I didn't know about. And one day he came in, and it was interesting because he had just, so the Viper Room was owned by Johnny Depp, and he and his partner had a falling out, and then his partner like disappeared. And this is not, Johnny was never a suspect. But so they didn't know what to do with the Viper Room. So, they gave it in receivership to my boss temporarily. And so he's like, we're going to do poker games in the basement. And I didn't know anything about poker at all. And, I tell this like silly story about how naive I was and how I, like a good on the cusp of millennial and whatever the other generation was, like went home and Googled like, what kind of music do poker players like to listen to and what do they eat? Just trying to figure out how to, like what I was getting myself into. And then, I love music. And I think like, I always say I want life to have a soundtrack. But I made an incredibly embarrassing cliche playlist with songs like The Gambler and Night Moves and like literally like no creativity, no, like nuance, just here's the most embarrassing, like, poker playlist ever. And then I, got like a Wisconsin cheese plate from Gelson's and showed up to this game. And, then the people that started to walk in the room were mind blowing. I was 22 years old. And, so just as a caveat, the people that I name are people that have spoken about playing in these games in the public medium. It's not illegal to play in these games. And the people that I don't name are people that haven't been revealed and haven't revealed themselves. And that's just their story to tell. But, I'm sitting there and like Leonardo DiCaprio and Tobey Maguire are walking in and, and Ben Affleck and, somebody from the tech world that had just kind of, changed everything.
Is that person private?
Yeah. Over time, there were politicians that are household names, the head of one of the biggest movie studios, the head of one of the biggest investment banks, the director of one of the funniest, most iconic movie, and it's just like one after another, these people that represent different industries at absolutely the top of their game. And, of course, I am just like super embarrassed, like couldn't turn, get this playlist off, Well, I don't know. It's just what's playing. I didn't do it. And this cheese plate that like no one's going to touch because they are fancy. And, but, as the night wore on and all the attention was on the game, these people are speaking candidly, and I get to be a fly on the wall. And I love information. I love learning, especially in a context like that. So I just remember like trying to like sneakily take notes, like not on personal stuff, but just like insights, into finance, into this, into these things that I, could read a book about or whatever, but like I wasn't able to access people's like back and forth about it, And also it was funny. There was comedians like, and you're just getting to have this like larger than life experience. And at the end of the night, they were tipping me in chips, and the dealer counted out, like everyone had left, and the dealer counted out the chips and then handed me $4,000 in cash. And I was like, okay, this is not normal. Cause I'd been, I was like, I'd been, I was a cocktail waitress at the big Hollywood nightclubs and stuff. And, when it's a credit card or it's cash, different story, right? I cued in right away that when it's chips, this is the chip economy or the token economy is it's a different deal. And I remember driving home with a stack of cash, and I was sure that there was like somebody, trailing me because I'd never seen that much money. And just so I felt so alive and so like I had seen this thing that I could never unsee again. Mm. And then I kind of pulled into my little studio apartment, and my heart just sank, because it felt like I had seen something that I had like gotten a window into a world that like I did not know how to be a part of. And I remember calling my mom and telling her about this experience. And, I was like, I gotta go, I gotta get invited back. Like I have to be part of this world, but I have no idea what I have to contribute here. Like I'm so replaceable. I'm refilling people's drinks, And she said, well, maybe instead of thinking about all the things that you could get from these people, maybe you could think about what you could give. And I'm like, Mom, like, it's like such a mom answer, but
happens to be true.
It happens to be true, right? And when I flipped the script and I thought, okay, how can I make these people feel safe, make these people feel singular, and become, start to become a part of their world. And it was such an important thing for her to say, because these people at that level are so used to people being nice to them and then the eventual ask, And I just kind of like focused on, how can I be helpful? How can I solve problems that I'm not asked to solve? How can I make this experience even more elevated? Because I wasn't a gambler. I had a more expanded vision on what was really driving this thing, which a lot of it was community. A lot of it was storytelling. Like, oh my God, like you should have seen this hand last night, or like, I sat next to so-and-so and now we're going to do a movie together. Like there was this mythology and this belonging and this community and this excitement and fantasy. And so, I would sit and I would make notes on like how I would do things differently, and how I would create an even more like exciting, emotionally galvanizing experience. And, after a couple months, I was like, I don't want to serve drinks at these games. Like, I want to own these games. This was compelling for so many reasons, but one, if I was in charge of those 9 seats that were in high demand, that instantly gave me power. That instantly gave me leverage over people that it's almost impossible to have leverage over. And it's not that I wanted to misuse the leverage. It's just that I didn't want to feel powerless anymore. Like I wanted, and I also like creatively and as an entrepreneur, which I realized I was in those early months, because I didn't know what my path was going to be. My dad was like, you like to argue and read, you should go to law school. So, but I didn't really know if that was what I wanted. And the first time I took the LSAT, I bombed it. And then I studied for a year and a half. And then I scored in the 99th percentile. But like, I didn't know if that was like really, I've always found like a way around like my own mediocrity by like hard work and persistence. But that's not always like the path that is right. Like I think it's better to find what you're like actually naturally good at than trying to, just outsmart, your limitations there. And not always, right? But like when I was running these games, I was in flow state. I was like, I love this like sort of, I love the sort of chaos. I love being able to solve problems like on the fly. I love anticipating, what is going to like make this night flow better and what's going to make people happy and what's going to make this more interesting. And I was always thinking of ways to like upgrade the experience. And, I was just, I was just fascinated with it. And I was also fascinated with learning about the world from some of the people who were actively engaged in shaping culture and shaping industry. And I also really liked like viewing human behavior from this lens. Poker has a lot of like really fascinating directly translatable skills and sort of like pieces of the human experience. Like it teaches you how to make decisions with limited information in a short amount of time. And you can start to see the strengths and the liabilities that affect that. Probabilistic thinking was a huge lesson for me. Understanding that people who couldn't emotionally regulate themselves were gonna lose. People that when they got a bad beat, meaning that they got it in good, they got their money in good, they should have won, and they lost. And then that like sort of feeling of, some people they went on tilt or whatever, that affected them in such a way that I saw them miss out on massive opportunities. I mean, there was so many incredible lessons. And also the players were all fascinating people and the dialogue was hilarious and crazy. And, poker might be the last, American campfire. I mean, the stories and and some of them were not great. Some of them I'm like, okay, this is, like hard to listen to, but, but I also was like, okay, this is their room, like whatever. But so I was really fascinated and I knew I wanted to have my own games, but I was also very loyal. And basically at this time, my boss was under a ton of stress. He had all these, projects going, and his two partners were kind of always just like, I would get a call at like 7 a.m. like, you got to go pick up so-and-so at the Four Seasons, it's just like, and so he said, I think you're investing way too much time in this game, and I need your help at the office. And by this time, like, he wasn't paying me a salary. I was just getting tipped from the game, and that was covering my like endless hours that I would work for him. And and so one day he was like, that's it. I'm taking the game. I'm giving it to this girl that I like. That was not, the sort of like sentence that he used, but he was like, send all the contacts to X, and I by this time I had really like invested a lot in the relationships, in I was keeping track of I was keeping track of all the wins and losses. I was actively recruiting. I wasn't just this passive cocktail waitress, and
do you mind if I stop you before we get to that point? Because this is a later part of the story when you end up taking the game over. But
yeah.
Okay, so you get into this room initially, and like, had you had any, because there's, celebrity has like an effect on people, right? But then you get into this room and there's not only celebrities, there's billionaires, there's athletes. And then not only are those people there, but you're getting to listen to these, like, you're getting to see behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Right. And the example that a lot of people use is like when they get to different levels of wealth, it's like those people are on a different plane. They're just like, it's like if there's a world that our eyes can't see, it's like you just kind of became aware of it, right? Yeah. And they make money in different ways. And there's things that they know that we just simply don't know. And that, like, to me is like a theme that I try to tap into in this show, is like peering behind the curtain. And like, I want to know what I'm not supposed to know in life overall.
Yes.
So what was that like when you kind of sit down and you listen to some of these, like you said, conversations, and if you could think of an example that's not divulging any personal information, but like, I would imagine we're talking about like business deals and crazy stuff like that, just unfolding before you.
Absolutely. I mean, well, first of all, for someone in their young 20s who grew up with Titanic, I'm not going to say there wasn't a moment of like, oh my God, it's Jack Dawson, but then you see really quickly, or I saw really quickly, that, the people that they portray on screen are typically worlds away from who they really are. And so that part of the sheen faded really quickly for me. I saw this, and by the way, there were some like Hollywood people that I found massively interesting and massively brilliant. But like just the famous like actors or whatever, unless there was some other dimension to them, that wore off really quickly for me. But learning the origin story of one of the biggest, tech companies in the world, or hearing about specific, like, a politician who like knows political history or has, the real information on geopolitics, or, hearing about how somebody like negotiated the deal of a lifetime, and just this endless stream of information, learning about the art world and how unregulated it was and how much money you could make, and then like meeting some of the like these incredible art. It was just like, it was the MBA that we all dream of, and then it was also like hilarious. You have like all these different personalities. And, you know, movie directors that directed the funniest movies at the time. And, you know, who would just like hone in on like someone at the table and just haze the shit out of them, you know? And just like, I mean, you know, like just the dynamic, like you have Rick Solomon and Ben Affleck and like a like very buttoned up, like world famous economist. And you know what I mean? Like it's like, you can't, the chemistry here is just, it's unmatched. And so it was just massively entertaining. And also, I mean, so much of what I learned in those early days helped me with, you know, navigating like when I wanted to make a movie, et cetera. Like I'd learned so much. I learned, you know, about pretty much everything you could possibly think of in terms of business or persistence or, you know, ways that people went from being underdogs to, you know, being so dominant in their industry. And then also the zeitgeist, like things that were happening in real time that the rest of us kind of got the broad strokes of, but I had this direct line to this inside information kind of. And it was all very, I mean, it was thrilling. And plus, like, you know, after I started my own game. So when Reardon said, I'm going to give this game to, you know, this other girl, I was like, I got to take a shot, you know? And by that time I had, you know, created some allies and people really trusted me. And so they, you know, so one of them helped me like organize my own game. And I really didn't think it was going to work because this is the Billionaire Boys Club, you know, real tight membership. I'm now about to turn 24 years old, you know, like from a small town, like how am I going to win here? But I was just like, I got to take a shot because I want this and I want it bad. And so, you know, I really like kind of spent like all the money that I had made up until that point to create this night that I wanted to be, you know, unforgettable. And so, you know, just the main points were moved it from this like, you know, little dingy rock and roll. I mean, very storied, but not very luxurious, you know, to ultimately to the penthouse suite at, you know, the Four Seasons. Hired a full staff of people, had everyone memorize everyone's favorite food order, drink order, the things they cared about in life. And, you know, hired people that were creative thinkers. So I would always say, unless it's immoral or illegal, the answer is we'll figure it out. You want spring water from some random spring in Switzerland, and you know what I mean? Like, we'll figure it out. And then, you know, raise the stakes from 10 to 50,000, which I knew would make noise. And then invited all the players except for my boss. And it was, you know, I really wanted it to feel like this immersive experience. Like you walked into this room and you were in Monte Carlo or you were in a James Bond movie. And just the combination of the fact that I had shown up for these people in a real and authentic way, not in a bargaining way, but really like came to care about them. And then also had spent so much time thinking about, okay, where are the, like, how do I create this in very like exciting, emotionally resonant experience that takes this game that these people are obsessed with and elevates it even more. And, they all showed up, and at the end of the night, they're like, yeah, we want this to be our home game. And then I got a call from my boss the next morning. And I mean, he was a terrifying guy. We're friends, we're still friends now. He's like, actually in an ironic, you never know what life will bring. He was the only one, or one of the only ones through this whole thing that stood by me and that helped me out.
Wow.
So I used to go around the office saying like listening to him and being like, I'm really worried about your soul. Like, I think you're a really bad person. But he was like, listen, you're too soft. Like, the world's going to eat you up and spit you out. Like, you don't know anything about business. Like, you don't know anything about surviving. You don't know anything about anything. You went to like University of Colorado, and like you're totally broke and you're volunteering at Children's Hospital. Like, what you need to be doing right now is figuring out how to make your life work. And this was like the education that I was getting, and it was so different than anything anyone ever said. But we constantly had this battle of like, extreme empathy versus, like, I guess, Ayn Rand objectivism, like rugged individualism, etc. And so he called me over, and I was like, he's going to kill me. Like, literally, he's going to bury me in his backyard, and no one's going to, like, big ego, right? And I just like staged a coup. And I remember walking into his house and just seeing his eyes, and like they were like so scary. And he made me sit in the guest house for like 30 minutes. And I'm like, why did I come here? And he comes in and he goes, I'm proud of you. And it's like one of those points in life where it's like, did I just level up, or is this like the beginning of my end? You know what I mean? Like, it's, it changed me because I was like, yeah, what I did wasn't nice, and it wasn't honest, and it wasn't necessarily like it aligned with this like ultra compassionate, like do right by everybody thing. But I also felt like I had a legitimate reason to do it, So it was it was one of those moments, like it was a graduation of sorts, but unclear in the right direction.
So it's funny, because I hadn't watched the movie since it came out, until I watched it when I knew you were coming on. But when I was reading the book and you described this scene in the book, I was like, I thought to myself, oh, this is bullshit. Like, he's going to come back and screw her later. Like, he's playing, this is a hand or like a facade that he's given her now, and he's going to wait till she gets comfortable and then fuck her in the end. And then that doesn't happen.
No.
But I think the reason I thought that, or I guess, is that what you thought? Did you believe him?
I believed him because I had seen like him be super savage, but I also saw that the people that were in his circle, he was ride or die for. And I think he came to see me as like a younger sister or a mentee. Like he's always like, no, God, it was so exhausting trying to raise you. Like, I can't even do it with my kids now, Like, he was like, you're so annoying. You thought you knew everything, But I knew that he, like, once you're in his orbit, huge heart, lots of generosity. And, so I did believe him. And then that's not what I expected at all. Like, I expected him to be like, you have 10 minutes to get out of town and never come back, but that's not what it was. And then he played in my games, and so for the next 4 or 5 years, I consulted with attorneys. I figured out how to do this thing legally. And I put everything I had into thinking about how, like what's not only going to sustain my position here, but what's going to keep upping the ante so that, I outperform the competition? Because as you can imagine, there are a lot of games in Hollywood and they're run by extremely rich, powerful people. And it's not as expensive to play it. Because basically what happened, the reason that it was legal is because the winners tipped. And if you can imagine, I'm in charge of these 9 seats that are in very high demand. I also become in charge of how much credit somebody's getting. And so it's like I'm giving you a seat and I'm extending a loan. So when you win, you tip. And it's not like you're tipping someone who's bringing you a drink. I have a lot at that time. I have a lot more power than that. Now, if somebody is a total fish and is a big attraction to the game and they tip me 0, they're still getting invited back next week.
What's a fish?
Somebody who is a bad player and will get a lot of money in bad and overtime. He's basically the worst player at the table. And so, and then it became this ego competition of like, I just tipped Molly this much, you know what I mean? And the games got so big and people were winning and losing high 6 figures, sometimes 7. And so, I started making legitimately millions of dollars. And I was a total asshole about it. I bought a Bentley GT and like I could barely see over the, the windshield. And I'm like, and at 24, I looked 17. And, like this was before there were influencers and like young little kids making a ton of money. So, it was like, it was crazy. And I hired all my friends, and sometimes in the beginning it was cash. And so I would literally like pour out $1 million on, the bed in the freaking penthouse at the Four Seasons and just be like, are you kidding me? This is my life, And people were, these were legitimate, like this was my network and these were my friends, and I could use this poker game to infiltrate any subset of society that interested me. So, I was starting to think like maybe I parlay this into being an art dealer. So I had some games with some like famous artists and art dealers, lower stakes, of course, but the brand was so like, it was so high end that people would want to play. And I remember one of the like really most prolific artists like made a little his series at that time was called the Butterfly series, and he made a little one that said Poker with Molly on the back. And if I was interested in learning more about finance, I could have, it allowed me to just kind of have this in everywhere. And it was super exciting. And it was, it's kind of hard to find the words. Like you go from this very regimented, like follow the rules thing to overnight you're making millions of dollars. And like these people are not only playing in your game, but like, wanting to talk to you about their personal life, and you become, their therapist and their whatever. And but mostly like what I realized is like that I am really good at curating this experience. I'm really good at, I become like the person that if there's something that goes down, even like one time, like someone showed up with a gun, everyone turns to me to fix it, and all of that was very exciting for me. I loved being able to like problem solve in that way. And for it to be this thing that was like, never the same, like always something different, like, and it was, it was great. And then,
what was the thing when somebody showed up with a gun?
Oh, somebody showed up with a gun and they were really pissed off and I had to talk them down.
About a loss that they took?
Yeah. Uh-huh. And it was a professional athlete. And they're like, crew. Yeah. And like the high of being able to manage that situation, to diffuse that situation was, yeah, like that was what I started to live for. You know, it was like just that adrenaline. I mean, that's, you know, that's what sports were for me. High stakes, everything matters in this moment, high adrenaline.
Yeah, I mean, that's a superpower when you can take a step back and not freak out and stay calm and get the outcome that you want. And that actually is like a theme that's one of the things that struck me most about your book is your story, I guess, overall, is your ability to do that, because that it's a really hard thing to do. And I guess it's teachable, right? It's like a muscle that you build.
Yeah.
But okay, so the athlete takes a huge loss at the table. How much was it? Do you remember?
First of all, I don't even think it was a huge loss. I think it was when the game was smaller. Maybe even like 40 grand. Which, listen, I'm not minimizing that, but like there was all kinds of stuff that went down. You know, it taught me so much about the need for humans to feel safety and to feel agency. And when somebody loses a lot of money, even if that person has an incredibly high net worth, it can still trigger something like very primal in the brain, whether it's loss of control or just, you know, that lizard brain being like, losing money is scary. It had, you know, like this chain of events that when your amygdala is in control, you're no longer thinking logically, right? And so oftentimes, like it became extremely stressful at times because I had to learn the art of how much money can you extend to a poker player, and when do you cut them off? Because you'll come up with, and because listen, I had to collect without recourse. And even though at this point officially it wasn't on me, it was on me. If I made the mistake, I would either have to fix it or people would not have the trust in me to be in this position. And so what I would have to do is understand that when somebody loses that a lot of money, like when the time to cut them off is, because sometimes they'll say, you gave me too much credit, I was out of control, or you didn't give me enough ammo to come back. And so, you know, making these hard calls was a learning curve. But then what I realized is when people would have a big loss, and they would go like, they would, you know, yell at the dealer, throw shit, like tell me, don't call me ever again for this game. And like, I'm not paying you. And, you know, your first instinct is to respond with aggression because you're afraid, right? But then when I realized, oh, this person is just in fear, even though that seems like very weird because their net worth is so high, they've either just experienced this loss of control or this like weird primal fear of losing money. And when I realized that, I was like, okay, so this means it's my job to diffuse it and to just try to get them back to a place where they feel safe and they feel back in control. And so, you know, the tactic was, listen, you are a really good poker player. You typically win. Here are your numbers. You're going to come back after you take some time and you're going to win this plus, you know, 100x more. But now go home, be with your family. Don't worry about the money. You call me when you're ready. You know, then you put someone back into the driver's seat. Then you know, kind of bring them back to reality. And I had seen so many like egos fight egos and games fall apart. And so keeping yourself in check and then looking deeper to see like what's under this, like what's causing this person to act this way. became such an important skill.
Do you think psychologically, on average, people are, I feel like I've heard that, especially when it comes to like gambling stuff like this, that people, they hate losing like for example, a very small amount of money more than they love winning a massive amount of money. It's like a losing versus winning thing. Do you find that to be true?
So I think that there's a spectrum there, and I think that's what determines whether someone's a gambler or not. I think, net worth, love of hedonism, none of those things are the common denominator. There's a common denominator whether or not somebody is a gambler. And I've met like multi-billionaires that if they lost, $5,000, it's too uncomfortable for them. So a gambler has more tolerance for those losses, and I think more enjoyment for the wins. Like the highs and lows are something that they actually enjoy, as opposed to someone who, like, if they lose $5,000, they're never coming back because they hate the feeling so much.
So how many of them do you think were addicts, like addicted to gambling?
So over the years, I realized that was kind of a huge factor. In LA, when I was running, a $10,000 buy-in, even a $50,000 buy-in, there were far less addicts. And I also, I think I was really kind of following some rules I made for myself, that if somebody couldn't afford the game, and they just wanted to like take their shot, but it could be really detrimental to their life, then I didn't pursue them. There were, a couple exceptions over the years, but they certainly had the bankroll and they had the skills, and then they just got too addicted and their life unraveled. And, you see that a couple times, and you have to make a decision whether or not, you're going to still provide this or not. And I think, I think those realizations and the fact that I kept doing it was where I started to kind of change more fundamentally. Because to sustain a game, you constantly have to find new blood. And what I realized is to sustain this game in the best way possible, because I was pretty much the only game runner, first of all, that I knew of. I was the only female game runner, and I was the only game runner that didn't play in my own game. And so that allowed me to be a lot more objective in how I manage the game. But it also, like, I had to like constantly feed this game with new blood, and I had to like make it so that it produced that adrenalized feeling. It produced the stories that, people could tell on the street. It produced this like mythology, but without anybody completely getting blown out. And so, for instance, a lot of the pros came to me and they're like, let me in the game. Like, I'll give you straight cash. I'll give you a free roll, which means, you have no down. Like if I lose, you owe me nothing. If I win, I give you a percentage. And a lot of people that played in their own games would take those deals, especially if they had a bad month. But I didn't. And so what I realized is if you see that table, those 9 seats with people with similar to equal playing styles, meaning they give a lot of action, similar to equal ability, and interesting people, then each night you have this incredibly like exciting experience. But at the end of the year, the money kind of just changes hands and the house wins. So that was kind of the strategy, and it worked really well. And some people did get blown out. And that sucked. But also, it wasn't always my job to know their like full comprehensive financial picture. Like I definitely had to develop relationships with people at banks because in LA, people drive a Lambo, but they rent a studio apartment in the valley. Like it's really hard to sift through, who's legit in LA or not. It's such it's a challenging world. So I had to do what I could to get real information. And it also like shocked me how everybody was for sale. And for like not even that much money. Yeah.
So, and I don't know, that resonates with me. I think one of my problems is sometimes I see the world too black and white. Like I'm too binary with my thinking.
Yeah.
Where in reality, things are a lot more gray than they are black and white. But I would probably, if I was in your situation, justify to myself and use the truth in the fact that they're grown men and these are decisions that they're making on your own. And I guess that's up to you to navigate, okay, like how much am I pushing this? How much am I letting it happen? Yeah. What's acceptable to me and what's not? But I think a good example of that and that like addictive compulsive behavior is I think his name in the book is Harlan Eustace, but I forget his name, but he's since come out and like written articles and made videos about it himself. What's his name again?
Houston Curtis.
Right. Okay. And I wouldn't have asked you that if that wasn't the case.
Oh no, he wrote a book.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. He's told the story. But so what was that story? Because I think that's a good depiction of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was a complicated one. He was one of the original players and he and Tobey were close.
Tobey Maguire.
Yeah. And he and Tobey were probably the best players in the game. And Tobey kind of vouched for him. So, I didn't do the full in-depth like analysis of like what's this guy's financial picture. And Houston won millions and millions and millions of dollars in that game. And then he had a bad night and had a bad loss. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, whatever. Like, I kept books on everyone. Like, he's up so much money, right? But I didn't realize is, I guess, maybe he had spent that money or whatever, and then he owed the game a lot of money. And I remember I ate 80 grand of it, and some other players did too, and then I guess. Tobey made him a deal that he couldn't beat. Like X amount of his upside. I don't remember the details, but it was basically a deal you couldn't beat. And you're also now like on massive tilt and like anyway, so then that started to like pose questions like, were they playing together? Like what, what's going on there? And then, Tobey started to get really sort of like dissatisfied with the fact that I didn't want to do his bidding, meaning I didn't want to essentially give him what he wanted, which would give him edge in certain ways. And then there was like these weird demands for compliance. I wrote about it in the book.
You're talking about like the bark like a seal thing?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really the only story I wrote in the book that exposes anything for, that like could be even at all harmful. And I think that probably had very little effect on his life. But when I was sitting down, there's a lot of moral calculus you need to do when you're writing a book. How much do you expose about your parents, about your childhood? Who do you expose? Like, how do you tell your story and have people understand certain decisions that you make and what the full picture is, while still protecting the people that you love or that you respect or whatever. And so it is a challenging moral calculus. But with that particular story, I felt really passionate about telling it because it's a version of somebody trying to leverage their power against you. And there's so much of this, well, I didn't have a choice because he was my boss or he was more powerful, and I'm not just talking about women, I'm talking about everyone. And the fact that like, I knew when he said, if you want this tip, you need to get on the table and bark like a seal. I knew that wasn't about that. That was a deeper demand for compliance and to feel that, he held power. And I wouldn't do it. And it ended up being this really, at first it kind of started out as a joke. And I was like, you're the actor, you bark like seal, And it ended up being this 35-minute standoff where the game basically halted and everybody's watching this.
35 minutes?
Yeah. And in my mind, I was like, if you don't give him this win, you're in big trouble. Right. And then there's this other voice in my head that was like, I'm never fucking giving him this win. Like, I am not compromising my dignity here. And then, I didn't. And then a couple of weeks later, he conspired with this whale. A whale is even bigger than a fish. It's basically a player who's really bad that has $1 billion. That's what the casinos hunt for. That's and so he convinced him to have a game at his house. And then all the players were like, well, we love you, but this guy, and the thing about the underground gambling world is it's pretty honest. There's nobody hiding their intentions. It's about money. It's about how can I win the most money? And so I remember, Tobey kind of gleefully calling me a couple weeks later and being like, you're done. You're over. And just the way it was handled, my parents were like, great, walk away. You've saved all this money. You've gotten this education. You have this incredible network. There's so many directions you can go. This is the time. Because I wasn't going to run poker games for the rest of my life. That was never the plan. But I was so angry, and I felt like I had to prove to them to some degree, but to myself, that I don't have to live in a world where somebody who has some, bullshit power because there's a fascination with celebrity that can just end me. I couldn't go out like that. And so I was like, I'm going to build the biggest poker game in the world. And I'm going to do it just to prove to myself, maybe a little bit, to, because it was in a second, my whole life. And by this time I had traveled the world recruiting. I had, like planned like trips and getaways and, spent basically all my waking hours thinking about how to improve this. I'd like realized that there was this hierarchy in the room, and there was like the billionaires at the bottom and the celebrities in the middle and the athletes at the top. So I'd like hunted down athletes and staked them in the game. And, there was like a lot of, this wasn't just like, oh, I'm just running a poker game. Like I was building I built a business, and I was making $4 million a year, paying taxes, had 15 employees. And this had become something very different than when it started. And so I was like, this is just so not fair. And so I was like, I'm going to build the biggest poker game in the world. And I heard that there was a lot of gamblers in Wall Street. And I heard that there was also this like epic, super secret game of like these, finance gods.
Can I stop you before we get to that part of the story? Well, first of all, my opinion shouldn't mean much, but I think that the book that you could have written and the book that you did write, you didn't do it in any sort of gossipy way. There's probably quite a bit of shit that you could have said that you didn't say.
Oh, for sure.
And you're entitled to tell your story. And I don't, it just didn't come off to me that way, as if it's like some celebrity expose. And obviously you're offered a shit ton of money to do that, and you turned it down. That's very well documented. But I just want to ask you one thing about Tobey. And the reason that it's interesting to me is because of like, I think about actors playing this game, in a game where you have to bluff, in a game where you have to, regardless of what hand you have to present as if it's maybe something else. So there's one story that depicts that, where he does a pretty good job of acting. Can you just tell people that story?
Yeah, I mean, I can't even remember like the actual like details of the hand, but basically he like really, he's in this hand with someone, and we've seen him in movies. Like, he can play Ernest really well, and he's like, listen, like, I have the top hand. I swear on my my mother's life or whatever. I can't remember like whose life he swore on, but like something that it was like, okay, like he, he's telling the truth here. And this guy the guy that he was in the hand with was just like so tortured. And then, the guy folded, and then Tobey like showed the bluff, and I mean, at one point he was like, it's not really about money. It's more about crushing souls. And I was just like,
fuck Spider-Man.
Right. Then you get to know someone, and you're like, or, his parents had him when they were teenagers, and he grew up like super poor, and like, it's, you dig deep and you figure out who people are, and it starts to make sense. It doesn't mean it's okay, but like by telling that story, I wanted people to know you don't have to acquiesce to power. You get to, like, even if it means you lose the game, you lose the job, you don't get the part, whatever, like having your sense of agency, knowing who you are, knowing that like nobody can treat you like that, is how you build yourself up, I think, to be formidable and to like, to be able to stand up to people like that and win.
So do you think that, again, you said crushing souls, that was his example, but, or his verbiage, but there was, there's plenty of stories about somebody just on a crazy tilt, and like they're playing all night long, and word spreads around, and a lot of the other guys want to come, and it's a fucking feeding frenzy. And what we're talking about is somebody on their worst night who's already down a shit ton of money, and they're all coming, and they don't really care, and they don't really mind if you're all the way at the bottom, if it means like a little bit more for them. So like, what is that, you think?
Honesty. I mean, that's what most business is. It's just, now we say like, well, we have a culture of like everybody, we want everyone to win. But I mean, you look at the big companies, they don't want everyone to win. They want to win. And they can, have as many like sort of, they can hire as many, creative marketing people as they want, and they can have, some virtue signaling like things and whatever. But like when you get down to the nuts and bolts of these big successful companies, they are constantly making choices that harm people and make themselves rich. Now there are some exceptions, but like we could, and so what it was is honesty. And it has made me want to find people who are a little bit more interesting than anything for money, like who are a little bit more dimensional than like, single focus. I want to make as much money as possible. I don't care who gets hurt. It's made me very like hungry and also very particular about who I want in my life. But it also, like, I'm not someone who judges that. Like, I remember when I was on Lance Armstrong's podcast, he's like, he was referring to those interviews that my dad did with me when I was little. And the one where I was recreated in the movie, but it's a real video where, my dad's like, I'm going to ask you a series of questions. What do you think about this, that, and the other, and humans? And it's like, I was like 12 and I was like, I don't trust humans. I think they're fundamentally bad, I was also like, marriage is a trap and society's a joke. And, I was just very angsty. But now I'm kind of in this place where you're talking about like getting away from black and white. Like I trust people to be true to their nature, and I don't think that there's good and bad. There are exceptions, but even like the worst, most heinous exception, that's somebody with something like a wire wrong in their brain, or like someone who's suffered like massive trauma that completely deforms your view and perception of the world. So, it's not that I don't trust people. I trust people to be true to their nature. And nature's a pretty powerful driver. The need to survive and the need to procreate and the need to, like provide or be self-sustaining financially. Like all those things are really powerfully driven into us. They're why the human race has sustained. And so I think, looking at people as good or bad or whatever, like it's much more nuanced than that. And it doesn't mean that I'm like, oh, he just had a hard childhood. Like it's all excusable. It's not that, but it is like, I'm curious. Why are you, why is this person this way? And I think that is a much more interesting and keeps you out of becoming extremely bitter and sort of like judgmental of people.
Yeah, I would agree. I guess childhood's a perfect example, but it's still root cause and like the root cause analysis is different from the excusability of it, right?
Yeah.
Like, don't you think at some point when someone's an adult, like you shouldn't really be playing that card anymore? Like, do you think you have to move past that at some point?
I absolutely think that I know for me, yes. And I think there are probably people that want to move past that, but where's the path? Where's the instruction on how to do that? We have a really we'll celebrate you and prop you up and adore you, and then when you make a decision or something's revealed, then we vilify you. But where is the instruction? Because it's pretty clear now that human beings have a really hard time overcoming some of their darker natures, bouncing back from trauma and, not creating these maladaptive coping strategies. Where's the education there? I can tell you one place I found it. I spent 5 years in a 12-step program, and there's a path there. I think in some religious traditions, I think there's a path. But again, it depends on who is imparting that path and what their intentions are. But it's not so easy to learn how to be a better person. And that's why I think it should be part of our early education and should continue for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, and I want to come back to the 12-step stuff for sure, because I think for you personally, a lot of interesting stuff came out of that. But so yeah, you mentioned you had, I think, you just had the game taken away. We talked about all that, and you mentioned kind of hearing rumblings about this big game in New York. So take us from there.
So I started to go to New York, and I started to try to kind of get ways in both to this, sort of legendary game, and then also meet other people. And finally, I got into this game, and it was a monster. It was 5 times bigger than my my LA game, and it was it was a crazy game because it wasn't just Hold'em. It was no limit stud, no limit 5, 7 card stud, which basically is just you're basically gambling on every street. Basically you could lose your $250,000 in the first hand. And the games that they were playing were much more, they would play Hold'em, but they would also play these games that were so volatile. And it was shocking because it was 2008 and the financial world was, but I was just I don't care. I don't care that it's 2008. I don't care. I don't care that I'm trying to build on Wall Street. I'm just doing this, and I just had blinders on, and I just, got creative and whatever. And finally I got to them, and, people knew about me and they knew about the game. So it was helpful, but it was hard to sell them on, I'm going to run this game for you. You've never had anyone run it for you. It's never cost you any money to play, And so finally, I sold them on that. But then there was this huge, huge obstacle that I thought was going to be insurmountable. They didn't really settle after each game. So it was just this long running, you owe me this, I owe you that. And in order for me to take over the game, we had to have a settlement, because I was going to bring new players into the game, and they weren't just going to be on some, these guys have been playing together for 15, 20 years. So I'm going around and I'm trying to settle the books, and nobody agrees on the number. Everybody thinks that they owe less or are owed more. And I'm just this is, so we get past that. And then I start running that game, and I start bringing in new players, and I bring the whole formula. And I realize in New York, if I'm going to be successful, because there are these same game runners that have been running these games for a really long time, and they gambled with their players, and they had relationships, and they had a real like monopoly. But they didn't have the sort of the brand that I had. And also there was, in a lot of New York games, like there was a lack of trust because people would either not get paid on time, or they would have to make deals with the game runner. You know, it was just complicated. Or the rake was too high, or, you know, the game runner would let pros play and would take a piece of their action, which basically is cheating. And so I was like, okay, like what's missing here is trust, and I can fix that. So I decided that I would become the bank for these games. I would settle. And there was a couple reasons why I believed that that wasn't as crazy of a decision as it sounds. I'd realized in LA that I had some pretty strong insurance policies. As long as I vetted on my back end, as long as I knew that these people had the liquidity, and you know, new players would have to post, or new player, like someone would have to vouch for them until there was a relationship that was created. After a couple times of playing in my game, there was no other game like it on the street. You know, where there was no rake, no pros, like, you know, people like this like very surreal environment with, you know, it was just like a James Bond movie. And then you settled at the end of the night. You know, I mean, in New York, my like MDB Inc. checks were so good that people would pass them around like at other games, like cash. It was a currency. And so there was nothing else like it on the street. And then also to stiff this game, even if I had to pay it, was reputational suicide. And everybody on the street would be like, oh, so-and-so's broke, you know? And so those two factors kept me pretty safe. And so, you know, I was like, I'll take over settling the game. You know, I'll write the check if I have to. And I think over like my 6 or 7 years of running games, I think I got stiffed
310,000.
Yeah. But like, if you think about the fact that I was making, you know, in New York, like $4 to $6 million a year, like all the money that I was making all those years, I basically had no overhead. Cause you know, I would do it at the hotels or whatever. And you know, the game would even pay for that. And then, so my, you know, downside was 310.
It's pretty good.
It's pretty good. I mean, listen, it's not fun to write a $250,000 check, especially to a trust fund for a trust fund kid that decided to not pay, you know, but, and whose dad was like suspected, like mob, who would have just been horrified if his like kids stiff, you know? But anyway, like, you know, it when I was doing my job properly, it worked.
And you still had not, and you mentioned the word rake a couple times, which
Yeah.
is the game runner taking a percentage of the game, which
Yeah.
is the thing that makes it illegal.
Yeah.
And the fact that you were getting tips made it legal, but you still had not taken a rake to this point?
No.
Okay.
So when I got to New York, something started to change in me. And I think it probably started in LA. But, you know, it's interesting how you get from being somebody who, you know, is concerned about people's souls and is like volunteering at Children's Hospital and like a straight A student and, you know, elite athlete, to like running like the biggest underground game runner in New York City. Like, you start to make these decisions, these small little micro decisions that are just a little bit left of your center, your moral center. And those, like everything else, compound. And each little decision, you know, you justify. And then, you know, I just remember like waking up one day and realizing that I absolutely cared more about money and status and power than I did about, integrity, or whether or not somebody's life could be ruined by a game. I mean, it starts to be a very easy thing to justify. Like, oh, well, anyone can have a Charles Schwab account and destroy their life, but some people are cut out to be, in those roles, and some people aren't. And I started to pay a big price for it. And I started to really kind of not know who I was and what I stood for. And I started to not really particularly like myself. It seemed like the more money I made and the more materialistic I got, the less interesting I became.
Mm.
And, it was just I don't know. And then things started to really also fall apart in big ways.
Do you remember the first time that you kind of dipped into that a little bit, or crossed the line a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think I started, so I didn't just have the big game in LA. In New York. I decided I wanted to have the mid-sized games and the small games. And so I started to let kind of some of the, people play that were maybe more gambling for a living. And, I knew that if they had a big loss that night, that was it, they were going to be broke. And I started to, just, I don't know, conduct myself a little bit differently, just feel like I would be a little bit more callous and manipulative, I had learned I had really learned how to gain trust and how to make people feel singular and special, and the levers to pull to get people engaged. And when I started using that in manipulative ways on the wrong people, I would say that that sort of encompassed it. And started to these games started to last for 48, 72 hours. And so, I'm taking a lot of Adderall and I'm staying up for 3 days, and I'm taking benzos to come down, and then I'm drinking more, and, just sort of on this self-destructive path. And it wasn't I remember after a week of games or something, I wasn't okay, now I can go hang out with my friends. It was no one, they went to their lives, their boyfriends or whatever. I had no life. This was it. And it was lonely, and we would get places. I would get a house in the Hamptons every summer and have games out there. And it was just there was no balance to my life. So, and then, then I started to step into some really bad sort of situations in New York. I recruited these guys from Brighton Beach, and I had their stories checked out. I mean, I had really serious private investigators, people that politicians hire, and their stories checked out. And they meshed well. They seemed Ivy League, if anything, and they meshed well with, these legitimate players. But I knew in my gut something was off. And then a friend kind of confirmed it, but I'm that could just be a rumor or whatever. But it turns out they were running the biggest insurance fraud scheme in New York City history, and they had alleged ties to the Russian mob. So the feds were onto them, listening to their phones. By this point, people, someone lost $100 million in one of the games. And also, these guys from Brighton Beach would bring backpacks of cash and get a check. And because I didn't have cash to pay. Like people didn't pay in cash anymore. The numbers were too big. It was bank wires, it was checks, it was, And so they started to listen to their phones, and then they started to hear about this game. And then there was that guy that was running a Ponzi scheme in LA. He came to the game and he would lose constantly, but somehow he convinced people to invest in his fund. So he lost $5 million in the game, but he raised $40 million at the table, which was just mind blowing because I don't think he knew simple math.
Took my bread.
Yeah. And then he and then he got caught, and then he was very vocal, and that's how a lot of this got exposed. And so now it's in the tabloids, and then I had this run-in with Italian organized crime. Somebody I really trusted said, I know some guys from Jersey, they run a pretty big fund, and they want to meet with you. And so I had them meet me at the Four Seasons, and they walked in, and it was just real clear that they didn't have the hedge fund vibe. They were definitely street. And they, made, at first it was this very friendly offer of God, you've been doing this all on your own, no one to help you collect, no one to help, no capital partners, people taking advantage of you, blah, blah, blah. And, tried to frame it in that way. And I was I really appreciate this. And a lot of this sounds attractive, but this would, be the end of my games. Nobody that plays my games would continue to play if I had these relationships. And then I was because I always thought, I was always trying to think about how I could, kind of outwit my way out of a situation. And I was but honestly, this seems like a really hard life, and you guys probably have some really valuable skill sets that if you ever want to do something else, you should call me. I was genius that one. And they kept trying to get in touch with me, and I just kept ignoring their calls. And then they sent someone to my house, and he broke in and he put a gun in my mouth, which is something that, I don't know if you ever forget. And he basically said, we're partners now. And if you tell anybody or you don't cooperate, we know where your family lives in Colorado. And then he beat the hell out of me. And he took everything out of my safe, which, I had cash and actually some gold bars, but also letters and photographs and things that my great grandmother, Molly Dubin, who I was named after, left me. And then he left, and it was reality check, Molly. You can't call law enforcement. You can't call your parents. You can't tell a single soul. And now you have to try to figure out how to not get your family hurt and how to not, become part of some organized crime syndicate. It was terrifying. I was ashamed. I was terrified for my family. And I had no idea what to do. And I was completely alone. It became really clear that it was no longer this oh yeah, it's cute. There's these cute girls running this poker game, and it's jumping up and down on the bed, and this was real. I was in over my head, and I had no idea how I was getting out of this. None. And my only contact with the outside world at that time was food deliveries and the newspaper, because it was really clear that I'd been assaulted and I didn't want anyone to call law enforcement. So, I think 5 days went by and they weren't calling me, and I'm what is this? What? And then I got the newspaper. It was January like 2011 or something. And the headline was 125 arrested in the biggest mob-related takedown in New York City history. And I never heard from them again. And I kept running games. And I was getting more reckless, sloppier, definitely more influenced by my alchemy of pharmacology and booze and whatever else I was using to make my life work. And my debt sheet was getting bigger. And so I started taking a rake. And that means taking a percentage of each pot. And in New York, poker had never been included in the federal statute, even though it over and over and over the government had tried. But the language was, these are games of chance, not games of skill. So it's a really powerful argument that poker is a game of skill. So, I was like, am I willing to like risk a misdemeanor for all this money I'm making, et cetera, but unbeknownst to me, in the Eastern District of New York, the government brought charges against someone for running an illegal poker game. Again, the defense challenged it, and the government challenged that and won. So the precedent was changed. And so I'm taking a break for probably like 6 months, and I get this text message from one of my employees, and it says, the FBI just raided the game and they're looking for you. And so, in that moment, like, I knew this is game over. This is not the cops, which I'd always kind of like anticipated, because you hear about cops raiding games all the time and taking the cash and whatever, or just raiding the game and shutting it down. But I knew it was over, and I just really wanted to go home, even though my relationship with my parents was very strained. But I just wanted to go home. And so I remember getting in a car to go to JFK and trying to book a ticket to Denver, and having my credit card get declined, and then my next card get declined, and then logging into my account and seeing this crazy negative $9 million, $999,000 balance. And I'm like, what? And like in every one of my accounts read this. And I made it home, and, the prosecutors or the feds told my attorney, she, her property, unlike her personhood, doesn't have the presumption of innocence. And we have good evidence to suggest that she has been profiting from these games illegally. And because the feds had put a confidential informant in the game. And they said, basically, this is on the civil side of the government. This is asset forfeiture. If you want to hire a lawyer and sue us, with what money? The mob has some of it, the government has the rest of it, like, what money? Then she can, but also we're not pursuing her in any kind of criminal case right now. But if we decide to, that testimony can be used against you. So I didn't have a choice. And so I just moved back in with my mom and my grandmother, like super depressed, super dependent on pills and booze to get by, but like, just a mess. And I like knew I had to get sober. So I went to this rehab, and I would like tell my story. People were like, look at this compulsive little addict, Like, okay. Compulsive liar, right? And I was like, no, this is like, I'm serious. But I got sober, and that allowed me to start to really face this with clarity. And went back to the basics, like meditation and mindfulness and, just like digging deep into strategy. And I was like, I have to put my life back together. And so it took me about 2 years to kind of get my mind right and to get a job, because no one in my network wanted to talk to me. They were all like, is she working with the feds? Is she working with the, And so I moved back to LA. I get this like little job at this production company. And then 5 days later, in the middle of the night, 17 FBI agents, machine guns, high beam flashlights, arrest me, put me in handcuffs, and put this piece of paper in front of me that says the United States of America versus Molly Bloom. And, I feel like I've like lost my mind or like slipped into some sort of like simulation, because I hadn't run a poker game in over 2 years, been living like a Girl Scout. And I just didn't understand the legal process. I didn't understand that for those 2 years, they were building a case. They were collecting discovery. So they take me to jail, and my mom has to fly out, put her house up for bail. And I have 1 day to get to New York and find an attorney that's going to represent me in this. And I don't have a dime. So I had 8 meetings that day. And the last meeting I had was with this guy, Jim Walden. He was at Gibson Dunn, which is one of the most prestigious defense firms. And Jim was a former federal prosecutor in the Eastern District who went after the 5 crime families, who has like this very evolved sense of justice, not in it for his own sort of, glory. And he looked at the indictment and he's like, you're in a RICO indictment for running a game of Texas Hold'em and paying your taxes. Like, what am I missing here? And he's like, I'm going to help you. This is fucking bullshit. And, so we started working together, and I remember like so clearly, I was like, Jim, what's our strategy? What's our angle? Like, and he's like, it's first and foremost going to be integrity. We're going to like navigate this with integrity. And it was just like this moment for me where it was another one of those, like, you live your life, and then like you come face to face with what your decisions have ultimately like come to. I felt like I got like hit in the gut. Like, I wanted to be Jim Walden. I wanted to be somebody who was doing good in the world and who, was like making an impact. And here I was under federal indictment, very public federal indictment. And it was so gut-wrenching. And I remember like saying to myself, like, never again, like you will never sell yourself out or your family or your morals for like anything on the other side. Like this, you just have to find your way back there. And a couple weeks later, the prosecutors wanted a meeting, and they were super excited to meet me. And they said, don't worry, we're not interested. This is not a case about the organized crime elements or anything like that. We want to know about the celebrities and the billionaires and the politicians. And I always want to say this. There was no Epstein in my game. If there was an Epstein in my game, I would have hand-delivered them without anybody needing to take my money or, I believe this particular lead prosecutor wanted, had career ambitions, thought that I would be a treasure trove for leads against high-profile people. And, he was right. I did know things. But I didn't know things that were like heinous crimes. I knew things that were like, people running like their own book, and online gambling was about to become legal in New Jersey and New York the next year. So like, I'm not going to be a pawn in that game. And so basically they said, if you're willing to become a confidential informant, we'll give you all your money back, and we'll give you a deferred prosecution, which will keep you out of prison. But because of the amount of money you made, we feel that there's legitimate grounds for you to go to prison. So we'll, that's the other option for you. And I went home and I think I had 48 hours to make this decision. And, every time I thought it through, I got to the same place, which is, this is my fault. These were the decisions I made and not under duress. I had all the opportunities in the world, a family that supported me, loyal clientele, a loophole that worked. And like, I did this, and I also knew the law. And so I just got to this place. I was like, if I drag these people into this who all have families just to get out of my like bad, selfish bullshit decisions, I'm never coming back from this. Like internally, maybe even externally. Like my reputation was already shot. Like that, that ship had sailed. But like, that's the end of, because like I said, I had like this very strong sense of justice. I had this very strong sense of like, you take responsibility and whatever. And like, if I made that decision, I just knew that was the end of me. And so I turned down their offer and I waited to be sentenced, and it was like a very long year. And, I remember saying to my attorney, well, whatever, I'll just go to federal prison. I'll learn a language, I'll mentor. And he's like, that's not how it works. And he's like, there aren't a lot of like white collar crimes in women's federal prisons, And he's like, not to mention the guards and the sexual crimes that happened. He's like, this is not a country club. This is serious. And, he wanted me to work with the government because he didn't want me to go to jail because he'd seen too much. And also he was like, who cares? Why protect these people, And I just kept saying like, it's not about them necessarily. It's definitely about their kids and like whatever that, but like this, I have to just be accountable for like what I did and who I became. Or I'm never gonna respect myself again. And if I don't respect myself, I'm not gonna fight. And then there will be no comeback, like there just won't. And so, I got really lucky, got a judge that was very disappointed with my life choices. But said, look, I'm inspired that Jim Alden represented you. I'm inspired that you had, because I had great character letters from former coaches and professors. And he said, I'm going to find you as much as I possibly can, but I'm not going to put you in prison. And, that was like, that was a lose your knees moment. Because like you can be as tough as you want and try to mentally prepare for prison. But when you think about someone taking your freedom, like, and then, we all went to dinner and everyone was like celebrating. And I just remember having this moment at the table, and Jeremy just got inducted into the Colorado Sports Hall of Fame. And Jordan just graduated Harvard for like the 90 millionth time and some other like special program. And here I am, I'm like the family felon, and I'm just like, holy shit. Like I'm 35 years old. I'm millions of dollars in debt, a convicted felon, social pariah. The tabloids are telling this tale that's not doing me any favors. It's not showcasing any of the, like smart business decisions I made. It's just like basically painting me as like, some like girl in a tight skirt that was like, hosting games, like a whatever. And, there was such a part of me that just wanted to like crawl under the covers and disappear. But I couldn't do that. And so I was like, all right, well, the only monetizable asset. The only thing I feel like I have left that I could actually could help me with this reputational damage, this massive financial ruin, is the story. It's unique. Typically these stories they're men at the center of it, and this is a unique story. And so I was like, okay, I'll write a book. And I got all these meetings with these publishers, and they all wanted to like offer me 6-7 figures for a celebrity takedown piece. And I was like, no, you don't understand. There's a much better story about this, young kid from Loveland, Colorado, who tries to find themselves in the underground high stakes poker world. And they're like, we don't know how to market that. Like, no, and everyone passed and passed and passed. And then I just was persistent and finally got this, pretty small book deal. Got a lot of press, like arranged a lot of press. And I was like, okay, this is going to be it. My life's, waited for my life to change. And then I think like 10 people bought it. Most of them were probably related to me. And nothing changed, but I still believed it. I still believed like in my gut that this was the way. And I just wouldn't take no for an answer. And so I had a million meetings in Hollywood, and there was so much interest, and even people who had no attention span would like, actually stay in the room and get captivated. And then it was like crickets. And so finally I asked somebody, can you just tell me like what changed? And he said, I'm going to tell you, because I think you're a nice person and you should know there are a lot of really powerful people, trying to shut this project down. And I was like, damn, I fell on the sword for them legally. I passed up on, real money, and like now they're going to try to block this. And then I was like, fuck that. And so I made this short list of the most successful filmmakers in Hollywood. And on this list, I was like, these are people that have to be also somewhat brave and don't really care or like get involved in the political stuff. Because what I learned from taking all these meetings in Hollywood is that there are two incredibly rare commodities: good writing and good filmmaking and original content. And those people, though they may not run studios, they are the most powerful people in Hollywood. Truly. They're the hit makers, They may not know how to leverage their power, but they are. And so I was like, if I can get one of these people, and I mean, my list was ridiculous. It was Spielberg and Sorkin and Catherine Bigelow and like, just like the people that were the most successful people in Hollywood. And I decided that, Aaron Sorkin's the guy. He was the highest paid screenwriter at the time. And also all of his characters had this moral courage. And, I was like, I think it's him. And people laughed at me out of their office. And finally I was so persistent that I got this super wonderful human being, Ken Hertz, who became my entertainment attorney and one of my best friends, to ask Aaron for a personal favor. He knew him. And Aaron's like reading the tabloids. He's like, why am I meeting with this girl, And I remember right before I walked in to meet with Aaron, I had this moment of like, what am I thinking? Like, my book sold 10 copies. I live with my mom. Like, like this is not like his last movie was about Steve Jobs, like what the fuck am I doing? And then I was just like, girl, like you are not getting anywhere without taking some audacious big risk. This is not like, I'm just going to like claw my way back. So like you've got to go so big that it's like it's like almost impossible odds, but that's your only solution here. And so I like put on my best game face and I went in and I kind of told him my story, and I was like a little cocky, like just certainly not how I felt inside, And when I was done telling him, like the whole time he was just like poker face, like I couldn't read him, And when I was done, he was like, well, I'll tell you one thing, kid. I have never met someone so down on their luck and so full of themselves. Which is just like Sorkin, like he's just the best. Like talking to him, emailing him, like working with him on the movie was just the best because he's so funny and he, like his language is just so incredible. And we both just laughed, and then I made him a bet, like walking out, and I won, and I was just like, okay, so are you in? And he slow played it for a couple of weeks. And then he was like, I love this story, and I love it so much that I'm going to drop Flash Boys, which I'm working on right now, and I'm going to do this. And it was cool because I was his only source material, so I got to work with him for 8 months, and get to witness one of the greatest screenwriters of our time in his process, and we became great friends, and to this day we're great friends. And I saw him fight hard for things I cared about in the room with studio heads. They're like, we can't sell this movie about a girl like that doesn't have a boyfriend, and he was like, listen, I can't explain this movie to you, but I see it in my head and you just have to trust me. And there's like a couple people in the world that could say that to Sony or to, whatever. And they just say, okay. But he was so incredible about believing in it and championing it. And then he went away to film it, and they were like, okay, it's like, it's done, it's edited. You should sit in a room and watch this before it premieres. And I was like, no way. I will not live through that, because like I didn't want to see it and, process it. And if it was good or if it was bad, and then wait the, however many weeks until it came out. So I saw it for the first time with my family and 2,000 other people.
Wow.
And right before I started, I was like, how do I get out of this room? Like I'm like, how do I leave without, and luckily it opened with that, with an action scene. That first scene saved me because I was like, okay, we're in it now, but it was this incredibly cathartic experience. The people in the theater were clapping at the triumphant moments and crying at this, I was just, and I was sitting next to my mom and my dad, and my dad just leaned over and he's like, this is going to give you another life, yeah, I mean, I was 10 years ago, I was pleading guilty in federal court thinking that this is the end of me. This is the end of my story. Like, I'm never, like, how am I ever gonna fix this? And then, I got to go to the Oscars with Molly's Game. I've gotten to travel the world, speaking to people, having these crazy experiences. And, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think to myself, like, can't believe that worked, so.
It's incredible. And like, honestly, just listening to you tell it too, there's two big things that stand out to me. Number one is, I think I told you this offline, but I saw an interview that you gave, it was probably like 5 years ago. And it was before I started my show and I became an entrepreneur, but I don't know why, but I took a screen recording of it and you were talking about persistence.
Yeah.
And I literally, I'll show you after this. It's from years ago, but I saved it as a screen recording, like a video, and for me to go back and watch it when I feel like I'm going to be a pussy. And
so cool. I love that.
To go through with it anyway and put myself in the uncomfortable situation and do the thing that other people aren't going to do. And again, it was you talking about persistence, but like the fact that you can go into that meeting and put a brave face on and just completely fucking pull it out of thin air. I think that is one of the absolute coolest things in the human experience. And it just goes to show, like, if you can manage your emotions, if you don't give in to that voice in your head that's telling you to just like, oh my God, just be honest with them. You don't have this. You don't have this. Like, play your hand and stay cool, calm, and collected. Like, I think that's the coolest fucking thing in the world.
Yeah, it is. And you know what? Like, there's, like, when you lose everything and my biggest fear ever was public humiliation, failure, you know, like, especially when I was so sort of like on top of the world and like cared so much about my reputation, cared so much about like my, you know, like supposed status and everything. And then it happens and you're like, okay, like, I'm still here, you know? But when you lose everything like that, and particularly if you do some work on it, you know, and you look at like, what was that really giving me? And do I really care about what these people think? Like, everybody wanted to be my friend. And then when I, you know, sort of like when everything went south, there was like 2 people left. So fuck it, you know? And so just being in that place where you're like, you don't have any fear, you have nothing to lose is such a powerful place. I mean, I remember, so when Aaron and I started working together, he said, you know, my producer that I work with is the most prolific producer in Hollywood. He's such a genius. He's, you know, worked with him on The Social Network. Like, he was Aaron's guy. And I knew about this guy's reputation as being one of the biggest assholes in Hollywood. I mean, they even made a movie about it. And so I'm on the phone with him and I can tell right away that he wants Aaron to make this other movie. And he's giving me this lowball number, you know, and this is not a vanity project for me. I'm not doing this because I want to be famous. Like, I'm doing this because I have to figure out how to repay millions of dollars that are just accruing penalties and interest. I have to get at least some of my skills and intelligence out there at scale if I ever want another opportunity again. And like, so I said to Aaron, I can't work with him. And everyone said to me, you're fucking out of your mind. You just got Aaron Sorkin and now you're going to try to get him to break up with like his producer who like is his guy. And I'm like, that's not what I want, but that's what I know here, you know? And so like, it was this week of just like, everyone was just like, you're such an idiot. And then, you know, but again, fearless. Like, I don't have the luxury of just like, you know, making a movie and not making any money, because I don't know what the opportunities are after. I don't know if there'll be any. What if the movie's not good? I have to get like a front end deal here, and back end in Hollywood is a notorious joke. No one ever gets paid. So he said, okay, fine. And then my brilliant attorney and I were like, okay, now we have leverage because we know that there are so many producers that have wanted to work with Aaron. And so like, I was able to make an unprecedented front end deal on a book that sold 10 copies. But like, you know, that's the best, like the best negotiation lesson ever is no fear. You know, you can't be ridiculous. Like, you can, you know, there are people like that just, they look for such a zero sum game that it's like, you know, no one wants to work with them. But, you know, the thing, like, where you can get to when you are fearless, when you're in survival mode, when your ego is far behind you, you know, like ditched somewhere, it's super powerful.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, that's what people say, right? You can't, or at least you can't come off as you're afraid if the other person walks away from a deal, because people smell that, right? But do you not think that you're only as good as your leverage in a negotiation? You think there's like gray matter, there's something else that you can work with there?
Um, yeah, I do. I think, um, I think that uh, there are ways to, like, basically, let me put it to you this way. If there's two people and they have the same amount of leverage, or even this person has a little bit more leverage, if you are more trustworthy, if you are considering not just like, let me like analyze and read the room, but like, how am I going to make someone feel in my presence? Like, am I going to like think about human psychology and like what people's core needs are, which is like agency, to feel safe, belonging, which all figures into negotiation, right? Can I trust this person? Am I going to have like, am I going to be able to like, is somebody going to like push me out, or am I going to be part of this? And also, does this person respect me? Do they think I'm like, all those things are so much more important than people give credit for, because that is how people make decisions. People make decisions emotionally, and then they justify it with logic. And so if you start to understand how people work, like, like it's this book that I'm writing, Affective Presence, effective with an A, EQ is about reading the room and regulating yourself. And effective presence is about emotional resonance. It's about impact and trust and connection. And, understanding core human fears and core human aversions, and just editing yourself in an authentic way. Like, that's the most important part, is like, don't just learn this stuff, become this way, it's really, it's such a more powerful way to be in the world, and the outcomes are exponentially better.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to reading that book when it finally comes out. But I was going to ask you about that in the outro anyway, which we're getting close to at this point. But so yeah, like obviously you kind of just mentioned what the book is about, but is it going to be about your, you're kind of a subject matter expert on this given your history. So is it going to be just like everything that you've noticed over the years in terms of human nature and how to understand that human nature and be predictive and that sort of thing?
I have interviewed a lot of scientists and psychologists, and basically like what I became really certain of is this idea that we can determine somebody's interior world by reading their facial cues or body language is total bullshit. Anybody who ever walked in my poker game and said, I can read anyone in this room, I knew I was collecting a check from. And recently, they did this metadata study on all the evidence about like reading people, et cetera. And it was a group of scientists who were on both sides of the fence. Some believed that this was absolutely true. And this stuff dates back to Darwin and like even like Plato, Socrates. There's like a big science does not like to edit its gods. And so but there was enough, like, it was such a polarizing topic. And so they did this metadata study on it. And they found that if you try to read somebody's face to determine how they're feeling inside, your error variance is 60%. Now it changes if you know the person, because the brain is as a habit recognizer, or if you're like, some people are like sort of savant-y about this. But for most of us, it is not the way. And it has further implications than just like whether or not you're going to be able to close a deal. Jurors do this. There are FBI, like recent multi-million-dollar programs to try to, teach this to FBI, law enforcement. Like there's implications in the medical world. And also, I also realized this when I started public speaking, because if you try to look at people's faces to decide whether or not they're enjoying your talk, you're going to be like, everybody hates me. Like I would be like, oh my God, they all hate me. And then like I'd get a standing ovation or, people come up to me crying. And so I've found that the only reliable predictor of whether or not you're doing well on stage is if people are looking at their phones or not. That's it. Like, do not look at their faces, because like some people, when they're angry, they get like, they turn red and other people just get real withdrawn and they're like planning your demise. You know what I mean? Like, it's really fascinating because what you're starting to look at is things that are like much more on the subconscious level and things that are much more universal. And, and a really important part about this is doing the work first on yourself, getting rid of your own biases, understanding where your weaknesses are, being able to not, take everything so personally or be so like hyper focused on what am I wearing? What are my talking points? Like, you know what I mean? And just be able to just kind of go in with a clear head, with a regulated nervous system. Like your nervous system will directly affect somebody else's nervous system. And affective presence, the point is that everybody leaves this sort of emotional footprint on the world, and it's a consistent part of your personality. So it's not like you're having a bad day and like, you leave this negative. It's more consistent across, no matter what's going on inside. And it affects not only the person that is right in front of you, it can affect the whole room. Emotional contagion is a thing. And I've seen it happen so many times. Like someone walks into the room and they're so funny and they like are so interested in everybody, and the room lifts up and you can feel the energy. And then that you have the person that walks in and they're just like, everything is terrible, politics, this, you know what I mean? And like the room just sinks. I mean, like we are social animals, our brains, there are all kinds of like interesting things about mirror neurons. And
you say mirror neurons?
Yeah. Like you're basically like, your brain's kind of like when you're connecting with someone and there's trust, they kind of sync up, and they reflect back what it's like this. It's almost like brains get on this like neural network, and they all start networking together. And some people overstate it, and some people like make it too big of a thing, but it is a real thing, and emotional contagion is a real thing. And starting to understand how all of that sort of underpinning works is I think it's a really valuable investigation. And I've had it. I mean, writing this book has been absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I mean, again, it's a super easy example is like, if something starts happening and there's, I don't know, you're going to get in a car accident, whatever. There's two people in the car. That's not a good example. But what I'm getting at is if one person panics, then the other person's going to feel that energy and panic. Whereas if they're calm and collected, then the other person's going to feed off that too.
Totally.
So you think that's like how would you explain that like energy transfer?
I mean, my nervous system will affect your nervous system. That's, like people, like when my daughter's really dysregulated, like my job is to regulate her, and I can. If I'm like all freaked out and I'm like, why are you whining? You know what I mean? Like that's not going to diffuse it. If I get my nervous system regulated, then eventually I can regulate hers. And, the science is fascinating. And the challenge is distilling it into language that's not hyper technical, and it's not hyperbolic, right? There's some people that aren't going to be affected by, your nervous energy, but most people will. And being able to calm somebody's nervous system takes them out of sort of that state of vigilance and cortisol and hyperactivity, and it allows you to really connect and impact. And there's all different kinds of, but also it's it's also important to look at the aversions, like what puts people's guard up, being too hungry about closing the deal, chasing too hard, like fake empathy, like overdone empathy, be like walking in with, leading with your resume and trying to be so impressive. And that's not how you connect with another human being. That's how you get somebody's guard up. Like your resume can come up, right, in conversation, but you don't walk in the room and just blast somebody with, all your accomplishments and stuff, and then think that you're going to get any sort of kind of real connection. I mean, typically, generally, it's always a much better plan when you're about to walk into a room. Yeah, understand your talking points. Have some way to, have someone know the value you bring, but something that people don't think about is what kind of emotional response am I going to elicit when I walk into this room with someone? And when we know that emotions are the drivers for decisions, that's a really important consideration. And giving people your full presence is really important. Put the phone down.
Yeah, you can tell when somebody's not entirely there, even if it's something not as overt as not looking at their phone or looking at their phone. You can feel it.
Yeah. And you know what that does to the brain? It says this person doesn't think I'm worthwhile. Doesn't think I'm important. And so even subconsciously, even if that person is so qualified or whatever, you're like, there's just something about them that I didn't really like.
Well, for what it's worth, I have a lot of people come in here now, and I kind of know when people are done or when they're getting there, and when they're just it's weird to explain. It's you're speaking from a point of, not that it's genuine or not genuine, but it's you're really speaking, and then you get to a point where it becomes a little autopilot. And I can sense that. And for somebody that I know doesn't like doing long sit down interviews, you've been very gracious, not only with your time, but your mannerisms. Or what you've conveyed in that regard. So that's fascinating. Just the whole concept, and I can't wait to read it. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Thank you. I can't wait to finish it.
When do you have any sort of timeline that you can share with people, or not yet?
I think 6 to 9 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything that that's top of mind for you that we didn't talk about? Anything that you wish I would have asked you?
No, I think that, there's what I've found in life is that when you think you get to your end and you think that I don't have any more in me. If you ask yourself that question, is that all I have? typically it's going to be, no, I have more. Like, I can give more. And the things that I've done, including, wanting to have a baby at 42 and having the doctor say, like, I'll give you 2% odds. And I'm like, those are the best odds I've ever had. Thank you. Like, let's do this. But, and doing 9 rounds of IVF, and then separating from my daughter's father when I was 2 months pregnant, maintaining an amazing friendship with him and being able to co-parent as best friends. Like, there is a path that is well-worn and conventional. And people will give you all of their opinions about it. Here are the odds of this. Here's the possibility of this. There's such value in starting to establish that relationship and that trust with yourself, where you say, you know what? It doesn't mean that I'm not going to, like, I always talk about, like, now I have a board. It's like my parents, like Sorkin, like, some of these really intelligent, creative people, and they represent different, some are the gas, some are the brakes, some are the, and I think it's important to have those people, but to just crowdsource your ideas or to just listen to a doctor. Like, the doctor, the IVF doctor that I went to, we tried 2 rounds and he was like, I think it's time to, like, come up with other options. And I was like, all due respect, if anything that was ever important to me, and this is about as important as it gets. Sorry. Yeah. I'd only tried 2 times. I would never have left my parents' house, And so, like, there are experts, there are endless opinions, there are the way things have traditionally been done, there's conventionality, there's all of this stuff. And that doesn't mean that you can't do it. The odds are the odds because most people get discouraged by them. And I just really think that if it's important enough to you, then you just keep going. And some days, like, keep going means you just send 1 email and then you spend the rest of the day in bed. It's forward motion, and it's continuing to dig deep and say, like, am I going to stop here? Is this all I got? Like, no, I have more. And the thing, I used to wake up in, like, these cold sweats during the time that, I was at my mom's house and like, how's this ever going to work? And then my antidote to that, the thing that, like, got me through that was like, oh, I'll just never quit. I'll just never stop trying. And there's no way that I lose if I just never stop trying. And, some days, like, are better than others. And some days you can move forward more, and some days you just do one little thing. But, I just think, like, you don't just get one chance in life, and failure isn't supposed to ruin you. It's supposed to teach you. It's supposed to give you the blueprint on how to get better and how to level up, and trying to reframe our relationship to failure to understand that it is a necessary and consistent and universal part of life. Whether it's your own failure or whether someone, the world has screwed you over, it is an extremely opportune time to study it, to learn it, to study how other people have gotten through it, to, like, really develop this relationship inside with yourself, where whether you believe it or not, you tell yourself over and over, I'm doing this, And I think sometimes we think it looks like, David Goggins. But that's not always that's not what it looks like for me. That's not what it looks like for most people. It's this like, some days you've got the wind at your back and some days you're just like a complete mess. And that's life, And once you solve like this problem, you're not done. There's going to be something else and some other challenge. And if you can just train yourself to be curious and in solution mode, then, I think that there's really like very few things that you can at least, really go for it and typically solve. And, then you start to understand that you're so much more capable, and that the world is so much more malleable than you originally thought. Yeah.
I think that's an awesome closing message, and I'm tempted to just end it right there and let that be the mic drop. But your problem is you're too much of a wealth of knowledge. So I'll have to ask you. Okay, so one more thing before I know we're gonna get you out of here. But you mentioned just failure and becoming more comfortable with it. How can people become more comfortable with failure? Like, what are some things that you might recommend that they do?
Well, I recommend to everybody to start some sort of mental training practice. And I always say, like, if you're going to start meditating, don't try 5 minutes. That's a lifetime. If you haven't sat with your own mind, that is a freaking lifetime. And that's a recipe for disaster. Start with 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Start so small that the dopamine hit for showing up exceeds the effort, because it is a very difficult thing, and it shouldn't be, right? We should be able to sit with our own minds. But once you start to, and a lot of people think meditation is emergency medicine. Oh, when I'm stressed or when I'm scared, like then I'll meditate. Meditation is a training of the mind to be able to withstand very challenging situations, to be able to pivot when you need to pivot, to have self-awareness. And so, I think that's the training ground. And then, when you are able to start to sit above the sort of base model of the mind, and the base model of the mind will say, God, I failed. This is too hard. Da, 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 da. And you're able to like observe that and then say, I don't think that's true, and then find ways to outsource motivation if you can't have it yourself, whether it's, start a like a archive of movie scenes that get you there, or motivational speeches, or music, or, books or whatever, and just like have that on hand. And just, sometimes you just got to get out of your head and just into your feet, and also like break it down into little bite-sized pieces, like 20 seconds of courage. Today, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to just make an LLC. And that's all I'm going to do. 20 seconds of courage. Tomorrow, I'm going to like, whatever it is, whatever you're working on. Today, I'm going to like say that apology that I don't want to say, but I think I need to. 20 seconds of courage. That's all it takes, And then you start to realize like then you can really cover a lot of distance, and you can make material changes by these small actions that then change the way you feel about yourself inside and give you this like internal power, because it's all about internal power.
Yeah, I think it's so true. I think, those small wins are stigmatized, and a lot of people will tell you it's not big enough, but they most certainly compound, and it gets to a point where it becomes addictive, and you gamify it with yourself. Absolutely. Because of all the amazing things that come with it, and it's like you feel yourself getting better. And for me, I don't know about anybody else or you, but like that is incredibly addicting. So
it is.
I get why the whole self-help movement can be like people fucking dive all in on it, and it's all they consume. And
yeah.
But to your point, I think you got to take action at some point.
You do have to take action. And also, it's not as complicated as people make it. It's just like, stop listening to your thoughts and just get into action. You know, like once you're in action, you're going to go somewhere, as opposed to just sitting around thinking about it. I do think if you can create a community, people change. Change is so much more effective within a community that's their ethos, as opposed to by themselves. It is very, very hard to change on your own. And you know, but not impossible, but hard. And yeah, I mean, I think that like my brain is very like, I think you've really kind of like gotten to the end of my brain. I don't think I have any more thoughts in my head.
Well, that's perfect, because that feels like a perfect place to end it anyway. So tell people where they can find you, your stuff that you're working on.
Yeah. You know, I'm not super active on social media, but I will give updates on Instagram and Twitter. I'm Molly Bloom. And yeah, that's that's kind of it.
Yeah. Oh man. Well, seriously, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for coming out from Colorado and being so very generous with your time. And gosh, man, it's just cool seeing the movie all those years ago and having you here now. And like I said, I think your story is incredible on its own, but you have a way of being able to articulate the wins and the losses and the lessons learned that most importantly helps a lot of people in their daily lives. So like I said, I'm very much looking forward to the book and seeing what you have next. And thank you so much. This has been so much fun, and I think people are going to love it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I really am super sick of talking about myself, but I watched, after my friend was like, you should really go on this podcast. I watched your work, and I think you ask the type of questions that really serve an audience, and I think you're really good at this. And so, here I am talking about myself.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. What's up, guys? Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the interview. If you got anything out of this video at all, please like the video, leave me a comment, tell me what you thought of the video, tell me who you'd like to see on the show. I really appreciate the support. It goes a long way on these platforms, as you guys know. Most importantly, I have some amazing guests that are coming in for interviews in the very near future, so please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of them. But that's it. I really appreciate your support. Thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.